As many of you know, Assassin's Creed, specifically the Desmond era of games, is a series I have a deep emotional connection to. These were the games that were the first to expand my interest in gaming. Prior to 2009, I was still on my PlayStation 2 playing games such as Guitar Hero and Dragon Ball, always kind of staying within a familiar range of games, not venturing too much out of my comfort zone. But when I went to a friend's house, I saw him playing Assassin's Creed 2, and I remember this moment so vividly. This white hooded figure standing on a rooftop overlooking Florence, seeing the active city below, with Jesper Kid's home in Florence playing in the background, giving that sense of just freedom along with it. These were totally different than the games I've ever played before. Now, I don't remember how much of the game I saw in that same session, but if you were to ask what my first memory of the series would be, it would be that. And I knew I had to play it, but I didn't have a PS3 at the time, the current gen console. But I did have a PSP, a PlayStation Portable, and I discovered that there was an Assassin's Creed game on that. So what did I do? I asked my dad to get me Assassin's Creed Bloodlines for Christmas. And that was when I fell in love with this series. And I knew if the game was this good on the PlayStation Portable, just imagine what it would be like on a PS3. So 2010 rolls around and my birthday's coming up, and I was approached on what I wanted for my birthday. This was my chance. I ended up getting a PS3 and Assassin's Creed 2, and I was sucked in. According to my trophy list, I started playing around 3:30 p.m. and completed sequence 3 at like 1 a.m. So I'm sure I took some breaks in between, but I was just captivated from what I was experiencing. This was nothing like I've done before, and from then on, much like every 13-year-old kid at the time, this became a part of my personality. After beating the game, I wasn't so dialed in on gaming culture just yet. I was more so passive. I remember borrowing a copy from Assassin's Creed 1 and trying out other games. So when Brotherhood was announced, and I didn't know about it until the same friend who introduced me to the franchise let me know that Brotherhood was coming. And of course, my interest slowly went back to Assassin's Creed. That interest became my new obsession again. I didn't get it on release, my friend did though, and just because his birthday was right before the release, so he had enough birthday money to drop it on the game. I would later get the game on a holiday sale, and man, everything from Assassin's Creed 2 was a step up. Everything. Gameplay was a step up, graphics, open world, story. Unlike Assassin's Creed 2, according to my trophy list, I didn't play it on all day like I did with the other one. Seems like I was more so hopping in between the main story and the multiplayer, but I was still in love with this game nonetheless. And when Desmond kills Lucy in the credits rolled, the utter shock of seeing that for the first time and completely blind and letting the credits roll, I knew this game was special. I would later end up doing multiple playthroughs of this game, including once on Xbox 360 and another time on PC, and when I would first build my PC, of course. I've played through this game so many times, a lot of it just tends to be a blur at some point. I was so obsessed with this franchise, much like any other teenage boys were at the time. I tried making my own hidden blades, attempting parkour, and failing, and always wearing hoodies and feeling like such a badass for almost no reason. Assassin's Creed was that game, and I would proceed to play all of the series until I dropped off after Black Flag, only to not return to it for a while. I'm pretty sure I did do replays of Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood, Revelations, and 3, but I was never too invested in the franchise beyond that. And fast forward to 2020, and COVID struck the world, I did pick up the franchise again with Syndicate, which got me to play Origins and Odyssey. But then I hated Odyssey so much, and I felt like it was such an insult to me as a Legacy fan, I completely dropped it, and the franchise as a whole just lay dormant in my eyes once again. So when 2023 rolls around, I really want to explore the series with a new lens. When, Assassin's Creed Mirage is coming out, they're really trying to say, get back to the roots, and so I wanted to go back and I wanted to explore these interests, and I don't typically like using nostalgia as a good reason for saying why I like something. So I really just wanted to explore these stories from a new perspective and see if I can appreciate these games in the same way or in a different way. And when I did that, I kind of fell back in love with this series for almost entirely different reasons than I did when I was a kid. Yeah, the hidden blade, the beaked hood, the social stealth, all are great, but now when I look at these games, I look at the ideological war with the Assassins and Templars. I look at the Isu, the Pieces of Eden, Altair's Codex pages, and the meta commentary with religions and society. How the modern day parallel acts as a parallel to the Animus storyline, and how these stories intertwine. And that brings us here. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is going on 15 years old this year, and I really wanted to take a look back at this game and see what it was worth. Now, as you can see from the length of this whole video, that it's probably really long, because I'm still recording this, obviously. It's probably going to be really long, so I want to lay down some ground rules while we're here. Lastly, in preparation for this video, I wanted to read the novelization version of the game. But to be fair, Ubisoft does play pretty loose with their canon, and so I've tried to find some information on like whether or not transmedia is canon or not, but there's nothing really solid about them. So I even asked a few people. I got some opinions here and there, but no one can really point me the right way. So we're just going to take this as, let's just take it as canon, but if Ubisoft says it's not, or if it directly contradicts the game, then it's not going to be canon. I think that's just going to be the most healthy way that we're going to have to take this. So there will be points where I will deviate from the game's narrative to address the book's version. This will be mainly due whether I find something of note to compare to the book's version of these events, or there will be time gaps that fill in extra information that is generally regarded as canon to the game's continuity. And I'm not going to cover everything, just anything as I either find interesting or just relevant. So you're not going to see me compare two versions of the same scenes that are similar enough, such as Cesare's entrance where he names off every single person in his inner circle for some reason. Or so closer to something like Juan Borgia's death being played out completely different, or the time gap between Cesare's arrest and the final battle that the game completely brushes off, from what I presume are pacing reasons. So with all that preamble out the way, let's begin. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, 15 years later. Before we actually go into the story mode itself, I want to highlight the main menu, as this sets the tone for the game that you're playing. The choice of music, the UI, they all can go a long way for setting the game's tone. Prior to Syndicate, Assassin's Creed main menus typically use the Animus as their main menu. Now, specifically for Brotherhood's case, this starts us off with the updated Animus 2.0, or 2 point something, interface, while Jesper Kid's Master Assassin plays in the background. The background with the void of the Animus 2.0 corridor as Abstergo's Animus 1.28 flickers in the background. Now, why is that? Back when the game was fresh, there was a multiplayer mode attached to it, which had some kind of story reason to exist. So if you remember the room of the Animi?
Is it Animuses or Animi?
Brotherhood multiplayer takes inspiration from that. To have Abstergo have an Animus training program where they'd have fully controllable simulations where they'd have avatars and fight against one another so they can have a full-scale attack against the modern-day assassin. In the multiplayer menus, it would be a modified version of the Animus 1.28 menus, where you can choose the game mode, pick your avatar, load into the game. Even the in-game UI is a heavily modified version of this. I've typically heard two fan observations when it comes to the main menu, one of which has many fans who have never noticed the blue Animus corridor pop up. I'm assuming they're either just blinded by the bright light of the 2.0 background, or the more probable is that they're so preoccupied in getting in the game that they never really cared enough to notice. Then there's the other type who do notice, but they've come in too late when the multiplayer mode was already shut down, so they'll usually think that the 1.28 background is going to tie into the main story of Brotherhood, when, spoilers, it doesn't.
Now, I'm reliving the memories of Ezio Auditore da Firenze, my ancestor from the Renaissance, searching for a path forward. Through the bleeding effect, I'm becoming an assassin in more than just name. It will come in handy as the Templars prepare to enslave us all. They found us, They've crashed our hideout and we're fleeing the scene looking for a place to hide. Only there isn't any and time is running short. My name is Desmond Miles, and this is my story.
After the standard recap of what happened in Assassin's Creed 2, we're loaded into an unstable memory of Ezio's final confrontation with Cesare Borgia. As the memory itself is loading in and out, skipping dialogue, and just being overall glitchy and buggy, the Animus corridor is being covered in a sea of red to illustrate Desmond's sync with Ezio isn't sufficient to be able to pick and choose Ezio's memories, as Ezio's mental state at this point is being transfixed onto Desmond, forcing them to go back to the last full sync point Desmond had with Ezio. But sure, that's a convenient plot reason to justify not going straight to the end and skipping all of it, but as we've seen before in AC1 as well, this was already established, as the circle already tried doing the same method trying to get into Altair's later memories, but that was also rejected by Desmond when his sync wasn't sufficient enough. So, in my opinion, I think Brotherhood leaning into that is a good justification for doing that. Which would of course bring us back to the vault when Minerva talks directly to Desmond through Ezio, and which that's the start of another conversation, so I'd rather save that for an Assassin's Creed 2 retrospect. But I do want to know, in the novelization of this though, Minerva never talks to Desmond. Instead, the line's replaced with "defeat the Borgia," as if it's meant to foreshadow the events coming up. It's kind of clunky given, even without the context of the modern day plot of the novel versions, you're still just like, why would Minerva even care? When Minerva disappears, Ezio walks out of the vault, and as he attempts to take the staff, he accidentally activates a mechanism that essentially engulfs the staff underground, and which we never see again. Ezio, to his surprise, asks Mario what he's doing. Mario reveals that he followed Ezio out of concern. Going into our first gameplay portion, the whole opening essentially acts as a tutorial for any new people and as a refresher for people who are already familiar with the controls. So Ezio proceeds to climb up, and Mario and Ezio proceed to exit from the Vatican. After Ezio fills in Mario on what happened with Rodrigo in the vault, they run into some cardinals, who proceed to give them some shit and call the guards. Ezio decides to drop such an underrated quote,
"You condemn what you do not understand."
As they fight their way out of Rome, Mario and Ezio climb upon a tower as they were ready to throw the apple into river. Thank God. Ezio is still in shock about what he's even seen and what he knows in the vault. He hesitates and Mario offers to take the apple from him temporarily to figure out what they're going to do with it later, as their first priority is probably going to get out of Rome. And then, title card. Mario and Ezio arrive back in Monteriggioni, where Ezio recounts Minerva's message, revealing another world-ending event that is beyond their lifetimes. With Ezio instilling fear into Rodrigo, fulfilling his role within the vault, Ezio feels a profound sense of relief, one that he hasn't felt since his journey began, as he finally wants to give his body the rest it has been yearning for. With some unsubtle foreshadowing, the outer walls have installed some cannons for defense that almost hit the auditory men with their practice. Don't worry, there will be plenty of foreshadowing coming up. After a quick ride through the city, the people of Monteriggioni welcome back Ezio as he passes by, as Ezio is primarily the reason why it was able to prosper during the events of AC2. So it's a nice reminder for the player, if they remember to spend some time playing around with the economic system of the last game, that it does have some narrative payoff and it wasn't purely there just as a gameplay mechanic. Once Ezio pulls up to the villa, he is greeted by Claudia Auditore, who is sporting a redesign, in my opinion, for the better. If we compare her last appearance in Assassin's Creed 2, not only have they aged her up, I cannot find any information to confirm for sure, but her AC2 look is primarily based on the actress who played Claudia in the prequel short film, Assassin's Creed Lineage, Devery Jacobs. So I suspect, due to either losing the rights to her likeness or simply some creative decisions, they changed her face model to someone else. perhaps it's a little biased for me to say, and I just prefer the new face model for Claudia, and I think it works a lot better for this version of her character. But I will get into that as we explore Claudia's character as the story moves on. Once Claudia and Ezio greet one another, Ezio calls for a meeting with the other assassins to catch them all up on what happened in Rome and Rodrigo. But for now, while we get ready for that, it's time to explore Monteriggioni. I think it's a great time to acknowledge the art direction of Brotherhood compared to Assassin's Creed 2. This is the most direct comparison I'm going to get between the two games, where Assassin's Creed 2 went closer to that Italian Renaissance watercolor aesthetic, with each map reflecting the specific type of mood that was intended by the developers as they were showing their narrative purpose. Each map has a specific color grading that would match the city to either Ezio's relationship to it or what it serves in the narrative. So let's take Florence, Ezio's place of origin, where he felt most at home with the more comforting orange tint, and Monteriggioni, where it's a largely green color palette that would reflect the decaying nature of the city as Ezio returns it to its prominence. Relating that to the Monteriggioni map in Brotherhood, where we really don't see that anymore, and as the city has been restored and the people there are thriving with the variety of colors you see in this version that would reflect that. Also to note, the Italian painting direction of the last game has also been replaced with more of a straightforward realism with some color grading, as you'll see in Rome, where some places in the map have some different color grading, but generally this is Brotherhood's aesthetic. When it comes to personal preference, I get it. While I always appreciate and respect the art style for being different, I do ultimately lean on Brotherhood, as it does do a good job of being artistically focused while also trying to bring the series fidelity forward. So while Ezio kills a lot of time for the meeting, he gets acquainted with his new life. He helps out the stable attendant who somehow lost track of Mario's horse. Meanwhile, he's running around in circles right in front of you. Honestly, I thought I have more to say about this, but I don't. Not really a positive or a negative way, I'm just kind of neutral on it. He then goes out to help a civilian who's bringing flowers to the villa. Her name isn't mentioned in the game as it's not really relevant, but in the novel she is named Angelina Caressa, in which we find out it's Claudia's birthday. No real relevance to the actual plot, but some cool world building as it naturally it's integrated into the conversation. But not too many people acknowledge this, but this moment, although small, does start a subplot with Ezio and Claudia's relationship, as it does establish that Ezio's travels back in AC2, while he loves his family and would do what he can for them, he does have a habit of being distant with them, in which Ezio does acknowledge this and would later reaffirm through dialogue between both of them later on. So after carrying the flowers, Ezio reveals who he is to Angela, to which they agree to a deal to keep him quiet to not ruin the surprise. Good luck with that. Although on first playthrough this moment may come off as pointless, it does serve a greater narrative purpose that does pay off later. Lastly, Ezio heads off to see Mario's men on the cannons to check those out, coming to see that one of the cannons is jammed up and the only person who's experienced on these is nowhere to be found. So Ezio offers to go look for him and proceeds to walk down the battlement walls to catch him sleeping down there. Wonder if the guys even bothered to actually look for him, considering he wasn't even that far away. So he wakes him up and brings him back to the cannons where Ezio's allowed to test the target practice. Not gonna lie, I generally don't care much for the cannon gameplay, not just for this game, just kind of typically in any game that features things like this, mainly due to the missions where you actually have loss conditions and the game doesn't effectively communicate how your actions are designating the win or loss to it. After that's done, some more foreshadowing, unsubtle, is done yet again. All done with the errands, Ezio heads back to the villa to be greeted by Caterina Sforza, who was also spotting a new redesign with her new face model and new hairdo compared to her last appearance in AC2, as she proposed an allegiance to reunite Monteriggioni's military forces with Forli's. Ezio considers the proposal but defers that conversation until later to attend the current matters. Ezio enters Mario's office where Machiavelli, Mario, Claudia, and Maria as he retells the fight with Rodrigo and his encounter with Minerva in the vault. It's pretty interesting how he speaks of Minerva, as he's still shocked about what happened, but he has this sense of wonder and curiosity as he still doesn't have much of a clue on who she is and even how to rationalize the Isu in much of a way that makes sense. When Machiavelli inquires about Rodrigo, Ezio reveals that he let him go. The game doesn't get into much detail as you're stuck purely from Ezio's perspective, but after being defeated by Ezio and being let go, Rodrigo's pride was shattered and opted to, at least temporarily, leave Ezio and them alone, as a quest he has been working on for literal decades, deluding himself to thinking that he was the chosen one, was destined for the vault, only to inadvertently be the cause of his own demise by conspiring to kill the Auditore family. For now, he lies back in Rome, attempting to keep out of the way. Hearing news of Rodrigo's survival, Machiavelli snaps at Ezio, condemning him for letting such a powerful figure live, understanding that letting him live will have consequences to what is to come. So he sets out to Rome in a hurry to minimize whatever damage there is to come, also known as more foreshadowing. Let me be clear, I'm not saying that foreshadowing is a bad thing, I just find it a little bit amusing how obvious it is that the chess pieces are getting put into place. Mario admits that while he doesn't really understand Ezio's decision to spare Rodrigo, he trusts that Ezio had a good reason for doing so. While political tensions are high between Machiavelli and Ezio, Ezio heads upstairs to de-stress and relax his muscles in a nice relaxing bath. Of course, Caterina didn't forget about their discussion, so she joins him to make negotiations. This will be a start of a one-way romance between Ezio and Caterina that the game doesn't focus too much on, as a lot of it is subtle or implied at some points, but the novelization greatly expands on it, and I think it provides additional contextualization. So when Caterina returns later in the story, I'll expand on it then. I mention this because when playing this game for the first time, the reason for the scene was lost on me, as my first read was it was just a branch off Ezio's charismatic personality. That is a part of it. If you're only reading that scene from that perspective, you're going to inevitably miss all the nuance behind it. But luckily, you have me here to over-explain it. So after tame sex scene between the two, we skip ahead to the next morning. So I can't tell if they were going all night or if they just woke up and started again. So after they start going for round 2, instead of Ezio bursting, a cannonball decides to burst instead. Ezio, frustrated of being the third wheel, goes outside to see all the foreshadowing that wasn't so subtle has finally come with the Monteriggioni under attack. In an attempt to defend the city and give the citizens time to escape, Mario chooses to make a frontal assault while Ezio stays back and helps defend them from the top of the battlements and help via the cannons. Told you by foreshadowing that wasn't subtle at all. Before we get to the cannons, I want to highlight a difference in how the novelization and the game play this out. Both, narratively speaking, are the consequences of Ezio's actions of leaving Rodrigo alive. In the book's versions of the events, during the attack, Ezio sees the people themselves suffering. Ezio having barely saved a little girl from an incoming rebel, then later seeing Angelina Caresses, the same woman that Ezio flirted with earlier, head decapitated and stuck on a pike with the Borgia general saying, "Kill them all!" The point of this attack wasn't just to subjugate Monteriggioni. It was meant to be a complete genocide of its people in an attempt to wipe any chance of the assassins regrouping and countering back. It's kind of interesting that a lot of people, including Ubisoft themselves, tend to look at Ezio as this almost perfect figure who cannot make mistakes. And I understand that it's still a video game and we need action, but I also think it's important to understand that in these older Assassin's Creed stories, to show nuance, you need to show these characters making mistakes and the consequences of those mistakes. This mistake that Ezio made has costed many people their lives that day, even though to us as the audience members, they're just no-name people that we're not obligated to feel any empathy for. But from Ezio's perspective, he ruined many people's lives that day. That's something that has to be traumatizing for that character, that he will have to attempt to make up for. Once Ezio makes his way to the cannons, you get somewhat of a bird's eye view of how overwhelming the Borgia forces are. Multiple siege towers, Borgia flag bearers, cannons, an army surround the town walls as they slowly advance forward as the player mans the cannons, trying to stall time for the townspeople to get into the underground tunnels to escape. As previously stated, from a gameplay perspective, I'm not a huge fan of the cannon gameplay. For me, there isn't really much sense of a progression, although I see the number of people going down, I would have just preferred a timer. They ultimately serve the same purpose, but the timer is a lot more consistent and intuitive to understand. Luckily, it doesn't overstay its welcome, as it's the only time that you'll really be mandatorily using a cannon in this fashion, and Leonardo's War Machine's more make up as the shortcomings for this one. A siege tower hits the wall and the Borgia soldiers come pouring out and making their assault on the mercenaries. Ezio abandons the cannons and continues to go and help them from there. This is where we see a lot of the additions in the combat system for Brotherhood. In Brotherhood, it speeds up the pace of AC2's combat system by incentivizing you to be a lot more aggressive with your attacks. So you start chain killing, thus speeding up the combat. In Assassin's Creed 2, the combat was very slow paced, where if you were aggressive, enemy health wouldn't go down as fast, so you'd be a lot more effective just staying on the defense and waiting for a counter, where that would take huge chunks of the health, or in many cases, outright kill the enemy. Some people criticize Brotherhood's combat for saying it's too easy, in which they're not wrong, but I don't think that was the point. I do think the point was more so of a power fantasy of effectively finishing off opponents while not being hit, much like a real assassin would, just taken to its absolute extreme. If anything, if you want to get the most out of the combat system, do not upgrade any armor or medicine in order to keep your health very low, and with the few fail safes to keep you in battle, therefore giving you a little bit closer to that glass cannon concept, where if you get hit, your health would run low rather quickly. As Ezio strikes down the incoming soldier, the front gates burst open.
I know you're there, Ezio! The Pope told me about you and your little group of assassins. Answers! Give me the gun his friend fashioned for us! We've had too much bloodshed. I think the cleansing is in order. So consider this an invitation from my family to yours!
Now, I had to play this clip in entirely because it's so well done, and summarizing it would only lessen the impact that the actual scene does. And it shows all of the targets that we'll be going after. Cesare himself makes a powerful entrance and does a great job at elevating the stakes in an attempt to finish the job his father failed to do. And of course, if you've played Assassin's Creed 2, you've already come with some type of attachment to Mario, so seeing him taken out in such a brutal way should impact the player on an emotional level, seeing him die like this. Now, with Ezio at a complete disadvantage, he is forced to flee for his safety. While the game does make some attempt to disable the player by limiting your running and walking speeds, I wish they went a little bit further and impacted your health and fighting ability to show how injured Ezio is at this point, which would of course force the player to play a bit more defensively. Not a big deal, but it's something of note where he's clearly bleeding out from a gunshot wound, but he's still taking out soldiers with minimal issues. Just a little lack of consistency within the narrative and the gameplay itself. Ezio flees to the villa after saving both Claudia and Maria as they enter the sanctuary, where Ezio locks the door in an attempt to get the guards off their trail. There's a man, neither the novel or the game actually give him a name, so I'll just go by the thief, and ask Ezio where did the tunnels lead to, and Ezio lets him know where. The man, seemingly satisfied with the answer, volunteers to go help the men. On first playthrough, this would seem like such a small moment, but this would of course intertwine with the Machiavelli plotline down the road. What's interesting to me that not only is the sanctuary serving a functional role as a refuge for the townspeople, but as a symbolic one as well, as the great assassins and proto-assassins of the past would help inspire and guide those who are present, as it stands as a testament of their resilience. The Borgia Templars, who wanted to remove all opposition that would stand in their way and prevent any future assassins, the assassins of the past, the present, and even the future would find a way to keep it going, even against almost impossible odds. After a brief time skip, the Auditore family have finally found some time to breathe. Ezio resolves into meeting Machiavelli in Rome and sends Maria and Claudia to Florence so that they would be out of harm's way, and he makes his leave. Ezio, being worn out from battle and slowly bleeding out, faints, and thus ending sequence 1. This was such a strong start to the story, having Brotherhood's story serve as a follow-up to Assassin's Creed 2's story to show the actions will have consequences. Sure, the foreshadowing can be a little bit heavy-handed, but I don't think it's really that distracting, even as much as I like to point it out and joke about it. But other than that, the pacing is quite well done, and while subtle, introducing character interactions that will end up having narrative payoff in the future. Desmond is ripped out of the Animus, and much like Desmond himself, we're just as disoriented coming from the Animus into the middle of a conversation between Rebecca and Lucy, as they quickly give exposition revealing the reasons for returning to the Animus this time around. As previously, the goal with the Animus last time was to train Desmond up via the bleeding effect with Ezio, but with Minerva's warnings of the future, it sets a new goal for our main characters to find Ezio's piece of Eden and to gain access to the other temples to attempt to prevent another catastrophe from happening to the Earth. As Lucy opens the trailer, we find ourselves in modern-day Monteriggioni, the last assassin safe haven in Italy, mostly hidden from Abstergo's relentless cell tower surveillance. Imagine how invasive this would be in real life, especially in 2025, where many privacy concerns are more prevalent than ever. It's like giving a corporation like Google or Amazon the power to track anyone, no matter how far off the grid they think they are. As long as you're above ground, you're vulnerable. Hence why the crew's only option is to head underground, back to the underground sanctuary where they can truly stay hidden. Once they realize the doors are blocked, Desmond sees a ghost of Ezio as he follows him and leaps off the edge. In a rather cool showcase of Desmond's progression of his skills, this would reveal tunnels that Ezio and the townspeople have used to get out of the Avila attack. But now the assassins are trying to get back in. Honestly, it showcases a subtle but neat parallel between the past and the present, as the present modern day story is intertwined with the past. But I'll get more to that when we eventually do get to the sanctuary. Embarking through the tunnels is pretty interesting, as it acts as its own parkour puzzle section. Very similar to the Assassin's Tombs in AC2, where it's all pretty linear and none of it gets too hard where it would ruin the pacing of it, but if you know what you're doing and you're going through it, makes it more enjoyable as you go through it. From a narrative standpoint, this would serve as a meaningful character development interactions for both Desmond and Lucy, as it's not very often during the modern day that we've had any time to breathe as them and understand them as characters outside of the missions. As with Assassin's Creed 1, they were almost always under Abstergo's watch, so interactions with them as characters were kept to a minimum and gave very rare moments to interact on a personal level. With Assassin's Creed 2, when they escaped Abstergo, a lot of their interactions were mainly focused on the mission at hand. The nearest thing in the story, at least, that we're seeing some downtime with these characters, where they actually have time to talk as normal human beings and not just as tools of the plot. This isn't put down the other games and their character interactions. It would be completely out of place for Desmond and Lucy be joking around, meanwhile under constant surveillance at Abstergo Lab, especially since at that point they haven't built any trust. Then Assassin's Creed 2 within the hideout to a much lesser extent, as they do have some protection of the hideout, they were still mostly focused on the mission at hand. Brotherhood, by contrast, just serves as a natural evolution between them, since this is the first time we get to spend a substantial amount of time with those two together on screen that gives us a subtle but grounded evolution in their dynamic. And there's even a hint of flirtation here. Nothing outright overt, just friendly and comfortable familiarity that could be seen as a bit deeper. Yes, I'm aware that there's a glaring elephant in the room, but my approach here is to try to understand what the original writers were intending, rather than a post hoc justification to retcon past events. The way I interpret their relationship up to this point is sort of like trauma bonding. When we first meet Lucy, she is working for Abstergo, and later on she is revealed to be an assassin working undercover, to later on breaking Desmond out and working together against the Templars. So in a weird way, they both were metaphorical prisoners of war, trapped in an environment that was cold, calculated, and controlling. To break out and achieve both of their freedoms, and Lucy's involvement in Subject 16 death, while tragic, has relieved Desmond from suffering the same fate under Abstergo, Given everything they've endured together, it only feels natural that they bond, and a potential romantic feelings would form between them. As they're going through the tunnels, Desmond suffers through more side effects of the bleeding effect, as he's seeing more ghosts of the past, and we're seeing glimpses of Ezio and the townspeople's escape from the Borgia soldiers, filling in the little time skip that we had near the end of sequence 1 and alluding to the Borgia somehow finding out where the tunnels begin and follow them through. So overall, I think this section is completely underrated, as with many of the modern day sections, but it's kind of funny looking back at it 15 years later, and one of the biggest criticisms of Brotherhood's modern day section was as it's intrusive and boring. Yet in this game, the modern day doesn't show up until Act 1 is, and it uses its limited screen time to flesh out not only the motivations of our characters and establish their personalities, that even new players that don't have to feel isolated if they're coming in for the first time. As they enter the sanctuary, Desmond sees another ghost of Ezio. As he's in the sanctuary, he notices that he's older, showing that he returned to Monteriggioni sometime after the attack. There is a possible inconsistency here, as he's wearing the armor of Altair, which doesn't make much sense because that armor was destroyed in the attack. This has always kind of thrown me off because it wasn't even that long ago that we saw the attack on Monteriggioni. It's an odd placement, and the only reason I could think of why they went with this was because the Brotherhood robes weren't technically shown off yet, and they wanted to reveal that later on. That's probably me just coping from what was probably just an oversight. Lucy interrupts Desmond's observations, most likely in an attempt to keep Desmond's mind focused on the present. As they enter the stairwell, Desmond notices a strange symbol on the wall, but lets Sean and Rebecca through the bookcase. Sean inquires about the symbol, and Desmond reads the codes under. Without much information to go on, all we can tell is that Ezio is the one who left them here. So that was probably something to do with what they're looking for within Ezio's memory. After setting up the Animus in their workstations, Rebecca requests Desmond to hook up some modules to the surrounding power lines so they can get the power underground, which gives us a chance to check out the modern day as Desmond. Before we move on to that, I want to highlight a change in Desmond's character design going from Assassin's Creed 2 to Brotherhood. During AC2, he was pretty much carried over from AC1, but during the final cliffhanger ending, when they were abandoning the hideout, he was given a hidden blade that looked a lot like Ezio's blade and bracer, because it was. Though it doesn't make much sense of why the modern day assassins would be carrying a hidden blade from the 1400s. So in Brotherhood, they changed it to a simple hidden blade with straps that lock around his arm. They also opened up his jacket a little bit, revealing his t-shirt that sports an eagle design, then gave him a shoulder bag. The game never really highlights this on a narrative level, but if I had to interpret it, I'd say thematically speaking that once Desmond has received his training from Ezio's memories, it's showing his growth as a character in both mind and body, as this isn't the same Desmond who got kidnapped at Abstergo, who didn't want anything to do with the Assassins versus Templars fight, but now he wants to take on his own leadership in a way, and I think that's pretty powerful visual storytelling. Now I'm on to Monteriggioni. I really like seeing both the past and present of these settings, as it shows the passage of time from about 500 years that separate both of our protagonists. Even exploring this setting can be pretty fun too. If you're just parkouring like I am, this gives you an excuse to hop around. The mission itself is pretty good, though I can understand how frustrating it can be upon first playthrough, as it can be a bit confusing to understand where to look, so you're probably just confusing yourself and staying in eagle vision most of the time. Pro tip, stay out of eagle vision and the game will let you know when to turn it on. It will save you much time and headache. After getting those done, they head back to the sanctuary and they give you the option of hopping back into the Animus. If you want to talk to others, I'd highly recommend doing so, but for the sake of time, as I've already spent a lot of time on this, I'm going to skip it. So we enter the Animus and get reintroduced to Rebecca's updates. This would include the virtual training and the ability to replay memories, very nice additions for replay value. Now the virtual training was such a very good idea for a mode, as you're put into a completely simulated areas with just basic shapes and geometry and whatever objectives, whether that's free running, stealth, or combat challenges. Personally, for me, my favorites have always been the stealth and free running challenges, as I've always tried to beat my scores and find little cool shortcuts and efficient routes. This also lends to the design of these levels. While visually basic, they are not limited to the time period settings that they are in, as you are both completely within the Animus and allows the developers complete freedom to put enemies and obstacles wherever so the player can make their own choices. Replaying missions was also a community requested option. Not really a criticism of AC2, but people did enjoy the mission structure of Assassin's Creed 2 so much that they wanted to replay individual missions without having to replay the complete game. You can view the memories within the menu, but the game really wouldn't let you replay them. So it was a missed opportunity at the time. Brotherhood takes it to the next logical step, where letting the player replay those missions, but now with an incentive of optional objectives to improve upon your synchronization, hence giving a reason why people would want to return to them outside of just wanting them. So during your playthrough, you'd see an optional objective that will give a bit of a challenge to the mission without restricting it outright, which some did see it as restrictive, as it doesn't really let people have complete freedom in tackling missions how they want to, but in my opinion, those are just extra challenges that you don't have to do. It's just for completion. And with our reintroductions out of the way, let's move on to Sequence 2. As Ezio awakes, he sees a woman standing over him, attending to his wound. As he rises up, she catches him up on how he got there and gives him a message to meet Machiavelli in the Museo di Augusto, and gives him a new set of robes that were left for him, as Echoes of the Roman Ruins plays with this beautiful scene as Ezio steps outside to reveal Rome in the year 1500.
Roma.
These are remnants of what was left of a massive empire, currently under the oppression of the Borgia rule. Ezio is in the heart of the enemy. He musters what strength he currently has so he can see a doctor to numb the pain. The game restricts any free running from you, forcing you to feel some of that pain that Ezio is in. Taking in the beauty of your surroundings, feelings as you're approaching the doctor, giving you a small introduction to the game's economic system. Something small that's worth noting that the novel does reinterpret the scene so it's not so obvious that it's integrated in the gameplay, where the doctor actually has an office and is a lot more rude compared to the game's version of it. It's small, but I like the change. Now Ezio is healed up. The game grants you the ability to free run again as we climb up a nearby church so we can see our first viewpoint. Before we move on to the story, I think this is a great moment to talk about Ezio's current robes. You may have noticed from the footage I am not wearing the clothes that are in the base game. These are the robes that were featured in the 2010 E3 demo that are largely considered his canon robes. These are all over the marketing, promo art, and whenever Ezio's robes are used in other games, they are typically modeled with the canon set for reference. Some differences include the left spalder being in silver, unlike his games where it's brown. He also has a second bracer, and in some changes that most people won't notice regarding the robes themselves. As stated earlier, I'm playing a bit loose with the word retrospective, as there are plenty of people who have looked at this game from several different perspectives, usually with whatever version of official release they prefer, but my focus of it is going to be from a narrative lens, and for me, the robes that Ezio wears through these games has visual story to go along with it. We began with Giovanni's robes in AC2. As we know, it wasn't originally made for Ezio, and as he deals with these themes of legacy, of not just his father in the auditory name, but also carving his own path as an assassin and eventually gaining the armor of Altair, gaining a new identity that also diverges from his father's, but also giving him the freedom that would also intertwine with the ideological views of the assassins' fight for freedom. Then moving on to Brotherhood. As he's aging and gaining more wisdom, he's also stepping into a more leadership role. His robes will reflect this evolution in his character, the color palette being mainly of a bright white and red that will symbolize both power and maturity. The square shapes of the robes will symbolize power and stability. Even if you feel Ezio doesn't fully embody these traits at this point in the story, it's important to understand that as part of the point where Ezio will have to grow into them himself, both as a leader and as a man. All of that to justify my use of modding it in, so no further questions. Ezio makes a leap of faith, eavesdrops some nearby guards that are terrorizing some citizens, and we get our first tailing missions. Hot take. I've always liked tailing missions in the series. While they are slow paced, they are done so by design, whether that is to give the assassin fantasy of gathering information on your targets, eavesdropping, or sometimes it's just good for story purposes for exposition. While I can understand and empathize with the opinion that they are there to pad out the game's runtime, I just can't agree that they are inherently bad. After the tailing mission wraps up, we encounter a stage of nooses where the public execution was taking place, and upon the steps lies a grieving husband being ambushed by the same guards that you follow. Ezio intervenes and quickly dispatches of the guards. As Ezio speaks with the man, he learns that his wife was publicly hanged by order of Il Carnefice, and any attempt to cut his wife down, the man will share her same fate. Ezio attempts to console him as he understands what it's like to have loved ones suffer at the ends of the noose. So he encourages the man to cut his wife down despite the danger so he can reclaim some dignity. As Ezio looks upon the hill, certain of who his next target is no more innocent lives should suffer under such cruelty. It's a straightforward assassination mission, so there isn't much to it on a gameplay front. The main thing of note here is that Il Carnefice is also the executioner in the multiplayer. His inclusion starts off a series of side missions in which Ezio targets and eliminates characters that also appear in the multiplayer. Narratively, this mission serves as world building, highlighting this abuse of power under Borgia rule, revealing a society that is oppressed under a ruthless regime that takes away their citizens' basic human rights in order to maintain and consolidate power. As Ezio meets Machiavelli, after brief introductions, they go on a walk, taking care to not draw any undue attention, being that Ezio is, after all, presumed dead following the attack on Monteriggioni. Ezio is advised to purchase supplies for himself, though he would be better prepared for Rome's harsh environments and so he can travel back to Florence. However, Ezio refuses to go back. Instead, he wants to take the fight directly to the Borgia in the heart of Rome. Machiavelli, while surprised, proceeds to fill in Ezio on how much power the Borgia have, not just in Italian politics, but in all of Europe. Having Rodrigo at the head of the church and Cesare at the head of the armies, they hold a dangerous combination of power. With the Templar ambition to unify all of Italy under one umbrella of power, this would pose significant threat given how intertwined the Vatican and Italy's fractured governments are. As they approach the stables, they discover that in key points of the city, Borgia have taken it for themselves, and as a result, many shops have been closed. Ezio, refusing to accept this, decides to send the people a message by taking down a nearby captain and lighting a signal fire so the people in the surrounding area know that they don't have to bend to the will of the Borgia and can resume their businesses without fear of government intervention. For our gameplay purposes, this would also serve as another reintroduction to the in-game economy, in so as the player you are able to renovate and invest in local businesses, therefore giving you a passive income. This works so well as side content because it integrates within the main narrative into the side activities and gives it a sense of purpose. As you go around the world, you can take on more of these Borgia towers that will also serve as another way of taking down the Borgia without it ruining the pacing of the main story missions. They then discuss plans, and even though the villa attacks are direct results of sparing Rodrigo, Ezio doubles down on his convictions of sparing Rodrigo. Seeing as the assassins themselves fight for humanity's freedom, Ezio suggests that appealing to the people is the right move. While Machiavelli agrees with fighting for humanity's freedom, he's hesitant to agree that the people themselves are able to rise against the Borgia, using a metaphor of building on sand. I can see both sides really, Ezio taking more of an idealist position and arguing that one of the reasons why the assassins continue to exist in the way they do is because they defend the people who can't help themselves, while Machiavelli is taking more of a pragmatic and cynical position, arguing that the reason why the Borgia have so much power is because the people in a weird way gave it to them. So if the people understand that the Borgia can only thrive off their fear, then they can rise up and take back what is theirs. All they need is a guiding hand to show them the right way to do it. After some back and forth between the two, Ezio intercepts a letter from a Borgia courier, and on his way back to Machiavelli, he is intercepted by mysterious attackers dressed in wolfskin, in which we will find out these are the followers of Romulus. These open up side missions for other Romulus layers that aren't too relevant to the main plot, but they serve in gameplay reasons as the Assassin's Tombs did. Good parkour puzzles that will test the knowledge of the player's parkour system, with either back ejects, side ejects, timing, and simple problem solving that on a first run can seem a bit annoying, but much like most puzzles, like as I mentioned earlier, once you know how to do it, it's pretty much a breeze. Narratively, for purposes of this video, the follower of Romulus are intertwined with the church and the Borgia, and I think the individual missions are pretty cool as they all have some pretty good level design. There just isn't too much to say about them, but the plot of them, as they play the same role as many other side missions do, taking down other parts of the Borgia. Once Ezio meets up with Machiavelli, he asked him to show him where all the allies were. This finally guides us to a secret assassin stronghold in Tibur Island. No, the assassins didn't build it. they were just using a storeroom that was lent to by Fabio Orsini, cousin of Bartolomeo degli Alviano, who was a part of the papal army commanded by Cesare. To this, Ezio criticizes Machiavelli for wanting to launch an attack on Cesare and Rodrigo without having a full, proper understanding of what he's up against. Machiavelli concedes to Ezio, bringing up his attention about his other contacts in other districts either not being reliable or they're just busy with Cesare's allies, mainly the French. So Ezio decides to
make some friends.
This is kind of funny to think about in retrospect, not anything on Brotherhood itself, but I think where the series has gone now with this non-linear structure, if they were to hypothetically remake Brotherhood with the design philosophies of the RPG games, I can easily see this being the point where each section of the game is open for the player to tackle however they want to, thus causing each of the storylines to become completely isolated from one another until Act 3 hits. Which you can make a good case and argue that a lot of its origins do start from Brotherhood, as sequence opens up with 3 main mission markers that you can follow, but for the sake of streamlining it, we're gonna go in order of where it is on the DNA. As Ezio approaches the Thieves Guild, La Volpe, a returning character from Assassin's Creed 2, surprises him already knowing Ezio's request, but rejecting him because he suspects Machiavelli is betraying the assassins, citing his position in the papal courts and his leaving of Monteriggioni right before the attack. Ezio doesn't find this evidence sufficient, so La Volpe invites Ezio to spy on Machiavelli to see for himself. In La Volpe's perspective, I can completely understand of how he got to that conclusion. Up to this point in the story, Machiavelli is very reserved, and with mass amounts of corruption throughout Rome and Machiavelli's position, it's completely plausible that that is the answer. Once they find the meeting spot, Ezio and La Volpe take a bird's eye view to watch. The guard secretly hands over a letter to Machiavelli, and with La Volpe's suspicions on Machiavelli's allegiance, this doesn't look as a good sign. Then for some odd reason, the thieves attack the guards. I'm not even sure why. The game doesn't give an explanation for this. Something similar happens in the novelization as well, but neither one gives an explanation for this. It's just so random. I get why it's there for gameplay reasons, but I don't know the point that this was narratively. I tried asking around, no one had a good answer, or no one could even think of an answer because that's how random it is. That results in one of the thieves being injured, a young boy named Claudio. In a nice shakeup from normal escapes, you are forced to escort Claudio into a safe position, in which the game's notoriety mechanic returns from Assassin's Creed 2 and forces you to utilize blending into crowds, as going through the rooftops isn't an option without leaving Claudio behind. After reuniting with Claudio's father in La Volpe, Ezio is now wanted by the guards, so he gets himself to disappear through gameplay mechanics that will lower your notoriety meter, such as ripping down posters, bribing heralds, and eliminating witnesses. After ensuring the target is off his back, he returns to La Volpe, and despite what they saw, he doesn't think that's good enough evidence to suggest that Machiavelli is a traitor to the assassins. While La Volpe still has suspicions, he decides to drop it as he trusts Ezio's judgment and offers up his thieves back to Ezio and asks what he should do with the building. Ezio, wanting to ensure that their work is as efficient as possible, suggests that it should be an inn so no one would ever suspect of its true purpose. So Ezio offers up their money to renovate it. So when the renovations start to stop, it takes about a month before the inn is up and running. Ezio requests that they look for the Apple of Eden in the meantime. Outside of random thieves attacking the guard, narratively, this serves as more setup to start the one-sided tension between La Volpe and Machiavelli. Seriously, Machiavelli has no clue about any of this at this point. It's kind of funny when you think about it. But overall, it was a pretty nice reintroduction back to La Volpe. After learning that Bartolomeo de Alviano, another returning character from AC2, has returned from Spain, Ezio heads over to his private barracks to check in on the fight against the French and Borgia forces. After they greet one another, he is reintroduced to Bartolomeo's wife, who then tells him how the fight is actually going, with the Borgia side being weaker. If they force the Borgia out, they can focus everything they have on the French. So with the last Borgia stronghold, Ezio goes out to help Bartolomeo to clear it out. As he would avoid the direct battle and go straight after the captain, burn down the Borgia tower signals his success. As the tower burns for the rest of the men would flee, Ezio returns to the barracks, as Bartolomeo asks him to help him reinforce the barracks. In return, Ezio asks his men to keep an eye on Cesare and Rodrigo's movements. There honestly isn't much to say about this one. This is like the shortest section I'm going to pretty much write in this whole thing. Everything regarding Bartolomeo's upcoming arc in comparison to the rest of them is almost isolated from everything else. So there isn't really that much plot threads that start here that won't get finished when we get to his arc. So it's really hard to talk about it. But it is part of the main story, so I am talking about it. During sequence 2, Machiavelli mentions that the local brothel, the Rosa and Fiore, has been not communicating anything because the owner doesn't care too much for their cause. Ezio, knowing how powerful the courtesans are in their ability to get information, goes down to address them and see if he can get them back. Once he arrives, he finds out that the owner, Madonna Solari, isn't in. As he's inquiring about her whereabouts, the conversation is interrupted by Lucia, another courtesan, as she tells them of her escape from slave traders who were looking to barter Solari's life for coin near the Tiber. Ezio leaves to get her back, and as he approaches them, he hands them money and in return slits her throat, exclaiming,
"Take it up with Cesare."
In the game, it doesn't delve into this line too much, but in the novelization, greatly expands on this. At least from Ezio's speculation, Ezio thinks that Cesare has suspected spies in the brothel that were feeding information to the assassins and commanded at least Solari's death, but used slave traders to cover up his blatant paranoia. After a quick scuffle, Ezio takes back his money and returns to the Rosa and Fiore. As he arrives back, he is greeted by Maria and Claudia Auditore. Ezio, a bit frustrated, asks why they didn't return to Florence. Claudia straight up tells him that she wants to help him, as Claudia volunteers to take over the brothel due to her abilities to run a business. Ezio snaps at her that she shouldn't get involved, and Claudia stands her ground, so Ezio relents. There's two ways to look at this scene. There's the surface interpretation, which I don't think is entirely wrong interpretation based on Ezio's wordings.
You do not belong here, Claudia.
With it being a brothel and the stigmatization of what that entails for women, especially at the time, which could partly be true, but I don't think that to an extent. As again, the novel actually delves into Ezio's thoughts during this. It actually explains that line, "You do not belong here," is actually just referring to the fight with the Borgia. As Ezio couldn't prevent the deaths of his father and brothers, he doesn't want his mother or sister to get involved with this fight as well. As if Cesare has already targeted the brothel once, what is stopping him from doing again? It's coming from a place of love and fear, not from judgment. Ezio, although frustrated, still needs the help of the courtesans, so he uses the money to renovate the brothel, and during this time he wants Claudia to figure out where Caterina Sforza is. Just like the last two, once you renovate the building, about another month passes and we can see the changes to the newly renovated brothel. That for the public works just like any other brothel, but its true purpose, much like the Sleeping Fox, is to get information to the assassins. Still no progress regarding Caterina's location, but they are working at it. Narratively, this serves to start the character arc of Claudia and Ezio's relationship, as Ezio will have to learn over time that he doesn't need to get concerned with Claudia's safety, as she will their own individual story arcs that all mostly have plot threads that tie into the main narrative themselves. All three parties, the courtesans, the mercenaries, and the thieves, meet Ezio on Tiber Island hideout, show that Caterina will be at the Castello and Cesare is currently at the Castello now. Still no exact location on the Apple of Eden just yet, but we know it's given to someone to study for. So with all signs pointing to the Castello, they all agree that's their best opportunity for Ezio to assassinate both Cesare and Rodrigo. And with that ends sequence 3 and brings us into sequence 4. So we finally get our first assassination mission. Kill Cesare and Rodrigo Borgia. Ezio and Machiavelli arrive at the Castello on the date of Caterina's arrival. Watching from afar as the carriage opens, out steps Lucrezia Borgia and Caterina Sforza, bound by chains with guards surrounding her. Lucrezia, in a show of dominance, attempts to humiliate Caterina by showing that someone her status can be brought down by the likes of the Borgia. Caterina, despite being physically trapped, shows that her mind is still free and embarrasses Lucrezia and shouts to the people to give them some type of hope. Ezio, being concerned for Caterina's safety, has the impulse to save her first. but Machiavelli is insistent on targeting Rodrigo and Cesare. Something to note regarding Ezio's mindset at this current point: despite this exterior being reserved, Ezio did catch some feelings for Caterina. I didn't highlight them in the past sequences. In the novel, Ezio would have some downtime during these time gaps, sometimes contemplating his feelings for Caterina. He would wonder if she's okay, be worried that she was even still alive. So it makes sense that a considerable amount of time has passed between their last encounter. He would show a bit more concern, whether that's confirmation that she was alive or just having suppressed feelings come out upon seeing her negative treatment from the Borgia. Trying to have a justification in Machiavelli, he uses their alliance and the power she holds as barter for him. So as the crowd disperses, Ezio infiltrates the Castello. To get 100% sync on these sequences, I'd highly recommend, before even starting this, you go buy a crossbow and add it to your arsenal. In this playthrough, I didn't do that. I just wanted to go throwing knives. But just like Assassin's Creed 2, the detection system is so strict that even a split-second detection and you fail the optional objectives, either that or be really good at timing your throwing knives. While there are a lot of parkour puzzles in the mission, there are a lot of wide spaces in between, so you have to navigate them efficiently. As Ezio climbs the wall, he overhears a meeting with Cesare and his allies, in which we get some more characterization of Cesare and where his motivations lie. Even in passing, Cesare wants to complete control of everything and deludes himself into thinking that he's the best thing for Rome. He looks down on the church and the Pope and wants his allies to only answer to him, but to not draw suspicion toward Cesare's intention. It's pretty interesting to think about how Cesare thinks that he's the best thing for Rome, but when you actually see the people of Rome, the Borgia actively make their lives worse, illustrating the disconnect that the people in power commonly have, thinking that their lust of power as actual concerns for the people they rule, but is in fact just a power trip. Going further into Castello and scaling the wall, Ezio gets to a window and listens in on conversation between Cesare and Lucrezia. Yes, the game depicts them as incestuous. Pretty disgusting, but in my reading, I'm going to keep it brief. There's no definitive proof or even strong evidence suggesting that they were in any relationship. During the time of the Italian Renaissance, it was incredibly common to discredit political opponents with incest rumors, and with the Borgia family, it's no surprise that given Lucrezia's divorce from Giovanni, it was right for rumors to spread around. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, instead of leaving it to vague rumors, they decided to depict it as real, while also keeping the rumors aspect of it still there. Outside of the
incest,
it's pretty interesting to hear how both Cesare and Lucrezia refer to Rodrigo. As we know, he's their father, but when he's not around, they refer to him as the Pope. It makes sense when they are outside, but among just the two of them, it's pretty interesting to see them use such a formal title. This gives us a bit of insight of how the Borgia family works, pairing that up with Cesare's small meeting from earlier, perhaps even showing a strong dislike toward their father. Speaking of Rodrigo, we find out he isn't at the Castello. Given that he's the Pope, more than likely he's in the Vatican currently. So with that, Cesare takes his leave to Napoli, in which Ezio has to delay their deaths and prioritize Caterina's escape, which is going to be hard as Lucrezia at the moment had a bit of jealousy toward it and injured Caterina in her cell and demanded the guard to give her the key. So after finding out an entrance inside of the Castello, Ezio reunites with Caterina, sort of. But after a quick reintroductions, Ezio asks where Lucrezia has gone and heads off to grab the key. In a surprising twist of events, we see that Lucrezia is having a small affair on Cesare with a man named Pietro, giving more credence to how utterly dysfunctional this family is, and the writer still playing around with the incest rumors. Pietro will show up later in the story, but for now, Ezio takes Lucrezia hostage and takes her to Caterina. Along the way, we do get what seem like throwaway lines, but if you actually listen to them, they do offer some internal critique on Ezio's methods. For instance, Lucrezia tells Ezio that Lorenzo de' Medici wasn't entirely noble, highlighting how he locked people up for the Pazzi conspiracy, even people who weren't involved. She also criticizes Ezio for supporting the Medici, accusing him of keeping corrupt people in power and turning a blind eye to him, but somehow justifies Cesare's brutal actions, invoking a greater good suggesting that the ends justify the means. I think this is pretty interesting to think about. Both the Assassins and Templars fight for peace, but they have completely different ways to get there. Freedom versus control. Lucrezia echoing typical Templar rhetoric as they are aware of the harm that they are causing, all justified through it all being necessary to achieve the ultimate vision. The Assassins aren't perfect either, and I can go way into that, but Lucrezia criticizing the Medici for doing the same thing that they are doing now is so hypocritical and shows such a lack of self-awareness for how a lot of the Templar ideology is. Once Lucrezia is taken to the cell, Caterina takes the key, frees herself, and locks Lucrezia in the cell. Since her leg is pretty injured, she needs Ezio to carry her, and that leads to a long sequence of having to somehow stealthily carry someone out of the Castello, and the game giving you a virtual leash as you can't go too far from her or you'll desynchronize. During that conversation, they do talk about their relationship, noting with Forley gone that she has no value to the assassin. She then references their night at the villa where she wanted to ensure that their alliance, as it's become clear that Ezio may have seen it as more than just a political move. Ezio doesn't openly react to this, instead opting to mask his emotions behind his usual charm. I don't think Ezio is heartbroken or anything just like this. Just like many people, sometimes feelings just kind of develop unintentionally. So hearing it from Caterina herself that the feelings weren't mutual, yeah, it's gonna hurt a bit. But Ezio isn't going to dwell on it. He understands it, accepts it, and moves forward. So as they exit the Castello, they grab some horses and exit from the Castello in an action set piece. To get the guards off Caterina, Ezio volunteers to distract them for a bit and stands his ground. An explosion interrupts the fight, having the guards retreat back to the Castello, so Ezio takes this moment to escape back to the hideout. Once Ezio returns, he finds Caterina being treated by a local doctor after being guided back by La Volpe. Machiavelli arrives, prompting La Volpe's suspicions toward him to resurface. Machiavelli takes no notice of this, but is more focused on Rodrigo and Cesare, and Ezio fills him in. Ezio proposes to take advantage of Cesare's absence and expand the assassin influence throughout Rome. As Ezio and Machiavelli step outside, they continue their conversation about expanding the assassin's presence. This scene also acts as narrative payoff to their exchange in sequence 2, where Ezio was talking about appealing to the people. This time, he decides to lead by example. He uses a man who is being harassed by Borgia guards, and he wants them to use the people as who are against the Borgia and willing to stand up and give them the tools they need to fight back. Narratively, this serves as such a natural progression for Ezio's character arc. Being personally wronged by the Borgia himself and being cast out of society, he now becomes someone who leads people who are in similar positions as he used to be, transforming that pain into purpose. After recruiting a few people, the game's narrative does divert a bit with another assassination of a multiplayer character where you kill the doctor that was killing some local courtesans. Doesn't really give a reason for this, nor this is part ever in the novelization at all, so I don't really feel it's necessary to spend too much time on it. And the nobleman who gives Ezio a little boy at the dock, where I'm assuming it's a slave ship or something, given the context clues, again, not in the novelization, so I'm breezing right past this part. Just know that the point of these missions is to test the assassin's recruit mechanic, where you can call your assassins in for stealth kills, fighting, and arrow shower that kills nearby guards. Moving forward and getting back to the main narrative, as Ezio is roaming, he hears a mysterious but familiar voice. After investigating it, he discovers that his old friend, Leonardo da Vinci, is noticeably older now with grayed out hair and a grown out beard, but nevertheless that's still him, and they embrace for a hug. During this conversation, we find out that Leonardo has been forced by the Borgia to make weapons and other horrible things, and as much as he wanted to sabotage them, he knew that he would be killed if he didn't meet their expectations. But it's revealed that Da Vinci is the person that La Volpe spies were looking for, as he is also given the apple to study it. But since the apple's technology is so alien to them, Leonardo can feign ignorance and slow them down from utilizing the apple. Since no progress has been made, Rodrigo took the apple from him. Ezio tells him about the codex inventions that were lost and adds a new economy system of asking Da Vinci to remake various weapons and gear, such as the double blade, poison darts, and the climb leap glove. Not sure why you need a glove to have a skill back, but whatever. Something to note, while this scene in the novel plays largely the same, back during the siege of Monteriggioni, the book does decide to have Leonardo present when Cesare makes his appearance. Also, instead of having Ezio follow Leonardo around the city, Ezio tells him that he needs it all at once, and Leonardo drops him off at Rose and Fiore, and Ezio leaves the money there for pickup, so that they would limit their chances of being seen together. During this section, that we get an introduction to Leonardo's War Machine side mission, as Ezio kills an overseer and finds out the location of one of the machines that Leonardo has made. So he travels the Colli and we get a dedicated stealth level, where we have to travel across a compound and destroy the blueprints. The map itself is a nice little playground for you to play around with. So after destroying the plans, Ezio destroys one of the machine guns and has to chase the other one. After catching up with the other one, he steals it GTA style and uses the gun to defend himself while he escapes and destroys the machine as well. Much like the last few missions, there isn't much linkiness to the main narrative, as it's just to introduce you to the War Machine side missions. So after going through those missions, while I don't think any of them are bad, I understand the reasons why they are necessary to include as one of the main missions. They just don't narratively offer much, so I can't really speak on them. After returning to the hideout, Ezio has a meeting with everyone again, as they forge a new plan, cut Cesare's funds, weaken the French allies, and find Pietro and grab the keys from him. With the new plan set, Caterina decides to take her leave. As much as she wants to help, she acknowledges that she isn't useful right now, so she opts to be with her family instead. Before she leaves, she gives some encouraging words to Ezio and tells him that he's the leader and must reunite them if they want to take back Rome from the Templars. And she rides off into the night.
Vittoria agli assassini!
Victory to the assassins. Remember when I said that the novel introduces a one-sided relationship with Ezio and Caterina? The novelization very much expanded this out. During Caterina's leaving, Ezio begs her to stay, even admitting that he mostly saved her because of her, not of her utility. So when she refuses, Ezio has this initial intrusive thought of just abandoning the mission and going with her and just live for himself for once. I'm very much two minds about this. While I like the idea of Ezio showing a little bit more vulnerability, I'm not much of a fan of the implications that regarding his past relationship with Cristina, his first love. When we explore the Cristina missions, we dive into the moments of Ezio's past during these time gaps of Assassin's Creed 2, where we get a love story of Ezio meeting Caterina. While he's always had a love for her, with him being gone, she was married off to another man. So after a while, her husband gets into some trouble that results in Cristina being killed, revealing that Cristina has always loved Ezio as well. Therefore, his love ultimately made Ezio closed off. So when I see the novel do this, while it's not contradictory or pulls up any plot holes or anything, I do think it ultimately downplays the emotional weight of Cristina's death on Ezio. And later on during Revelations, and I know I try not to include later games in this, but this does have implications for those, when Sophia ends up being the one to open him back up again, I think I just prefer the game's more subtle approach in this instance. Again, I'm not inherently against the idea of Ezio being more vulnerable, but I do think it takes it a little bit too far in the novelization versions, where he outright says it instead of just leaving it as thoughts. But that's just me. Now that we're officially past the halfway point in the story, I want to take a quick break from the Animus storyline and talk about the modern day for a bit. Since the game doesn't rip the player out of the Animus to address any modern day points, it's completely left to the player to explore them for themselves. I typically don't explore the optional side of the modern day in these games, usually because the modern day story is pretty straightforward in its approach of pulling you out whenever it's needed. Given that Brotherhood does let you freely leave the Animus, I want to explore it for a bit and see if there was any interesting information that was hinting at further points in the story, whether that would be through email, optional interaction with other characters. Especially knowing that the ending in advance, I was really curious to see if there was something hidden within the emails that would hint at something. Alas, outside of some small background information and character interactions, just kind of a little bit of world building, and getting a little bit of an idea of what they do when Desmond isn't in the Animus, you're not really getting much that's essential to the plot. A bit disappointing, but it's kind of expected. I bring this up because if you compare Brotherhood's optional modern day sections to either Assassin's Creed 1 or Assassin's Creed 3, it does tend to be the weakest of the three. Given that Assassin's Creed 1's, you find out more information in the outside world and slowing pieces together on what's going on within Abstergo, or in Assassin's Creed 3, as the emails start as mundane at first, but then you slowly get interference from Juno and the emails start glitching up and stuff like that. I don't have a strong opinion about this, given that these sections are completely optional and you could have just never touched them and you wouldn't even realize that you're missing them. So I see it as a non-issue personally. I can see why someone could dislike them, but honestly, I think it's just more worth it to see these characters just interact, given how little screen time they get, and none of it feels like it's overstaying its welcome. But hey, we got perhaps one of the greatest modern day scenes of all time for this.
Hey, what's the matter, you, Altair?
That's racist.
You're racist.
Really? This is what you guys are doing?
Oh no.
Something that I've noticed with regards with how this game is structured versus how a game like Assassin's Creed Shadows or even Mirage is structured is that once you get past Act 1 of the stories that have their targets occupy individual story arcs. But when you go after the targets in Brotherhood, this starts at about the halfway mark into the story, while you take both Shadows and Mirage's stories where you already know about the targets and you need to go after and how many of them there are. In Brotherhood, they don't really talk about them being targets until the end of Sequence 4. And even then, not all of the targets have been revealed yet. So as far as the story goes, that there isn't a for sure endpoint in sight, outside of Cesare himself. As we load into Sequence 5, Ezio arrives back at the Rosa in Fiore to follow up on Claudia's tip on the senator, Egidio Troce, owing the banker money. It's pretty interesting how they interact here. Claudia is seemingly closed off to Ezio, in which oddly enough acts as a thematic contrast with how Cesare and Lucrezia are depicted. While Lucrezia and Cesare are close on the surface but utterly dysfunctional, Ezio and Claudia act as complete opposites to them, where they are distant but are completely efficient with how they are. As it's very apparent that Cesare holds all the power in the relationship with them, Ezio in contrast, while he is a leader, still relies on Claudia and can work with Claudia. After Ezio leaves to find Edigio, he finds that Edigio is being harassed by some guards that want to collect debt. Ezio intervenes, making quick work of the guards. He offers the money on the condition that he can lead them to the banker, and of course, actually doing his job as a senator. I liked this mission, but I'm not gonna lie to you, it's so hard in all of the best ways, as you're forced to stay on the ground with Edigio and lead him to a safe place, as you have to utilize social stealth to make your way through the city and keeping out of sight yourself and keeping Edigio himself safe. The only thing I really don't like is that the same thing in Assassin's Creed 2 is that the stealth is too unforgiving mechanically. So getting spotted for even a split second can make you fail the optional objective. But otherwise, I do like the challenge of testing your patience to get through and planning out your routes with guards buzzing all around you. Narratively, this does have some world building and narrative seeds planted within it. As we already knew that Cesare was planning on conquering Romagna, Egidio sent a letter to his brother forewarning them of it, while also revealing that the letter got intercepted. I like this, as it does remind us that this conflict isn't just taking place in Rome, but the world outside of Rome is still moving as well, and even without direct involvement of our protagonist, it will still have some relevance within the main plot. Essentially, it's not world building for the sake of world building, it's important to the plot, even if indirectly. So after a quick tailing mission, as I've stated earlier, I will defend tailing missions, and this is one of the best uses of them. As we approach the Pantheon, where the money is handed off for counting, we get a neat infiltration mission where we have to scale the Pantheon walls and air assassinate the counter, in which we get a second confirmation that there's a bounty placed on Egidio's head, giving us further confirmation that the letter Egidio had sent out was intercepted and someone gave the order for his death. After killing the guard, Ezio takes the armor while somehow concealing his clothes underneath, and they make their way to the party where the banker is located, as Ezio has to listen to audio clues to make sure that he is going the correct route. I mentioned the clothes, although it's pretty much a non-issue. It's pretty interesting how the novel tackles this, where Luigi, the counter, isn't depicted as a guard, but as a man in thick robes and a mask. So when Ezio kills him, it's a lot easier for him to conceal his assassin robes underneath. Which, logically, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Kinda wish the game went with this route. I don't think it's an issue. It's clearly just reusing assets, and I think it fulfills the same role narratively. I just think logically it works better like that. After arriving to the party, the guards are put on high alert as Luigi's body was discovered, so Ezio discards the disguise and opts for a direct approach as he tails the money, using Claudia's courtesans to blend through and make his way, and one of them directly following the guard that is holding onto the money. As they arrive at the banker, the guard sits down the money, and the banker grabs the courtesan and introduces himself as Juan Borgia. Neat. We have a little name attached now. When his back turns, the other girls take the money just as instructed by Ezio. While Juan himself is stroking his ego, he reveals that he already knew about the girl stealing the money and demands a free ride from her. More on that later. As they approach the main square, Cesare and Rodrigo are present. As Cesare makes a speech reiterating about his conquest for a united Italy, Rodrigo doesn't really agree with his plan, showing both Templars having different ideas of control, as Cesare wants them all under one umbrella, under direct Borgia rule. Rodrigo prefers them all fractured while they control everything from behind the scenes, which is completely consistent with his character from the previous entry, as Rodrigo prefers to be the puppet master, to be seen without being seen, taking a slow but methodical approach. Cesare, in contrast, would prefer to have his name known throughout the land, to have all people bend the knee to him. After they take their leave, Ezio must let them go for now to focus on Juan Borgia. So after killing him, we finally get our first Animus Corridor scene. Now, let's take a look at the scene. As Juan is reflecting on his life, he is saying that he doesn't really regret anything about it, with Ezio saying, "A man of power must be contemptuous of delicacies," while basically criticizing him for his abuse of power instead of helping the people. He'd rather serve himself, while Juan is retorting that he gave the people what they want, and Ezio calling it out and saying that it's basically all for show, and all the showboating was what led to his own demise, and Ezio lays him down and walks away. Now, I want to take a quick rewind. Because I want to look at the novel's versions of these events. Now, this is going to be a quick trigger warning for everyone, but this does depict some scenes of sexual assault. Obviously, I'm not going to show it visually on here, considering it's a book, and probably not allowed on YouTube. But the point is, if that is concerning for you, then you can skip to this next time that I have on screen right now. Otherwise, if you're fine with that, hop on in. When Juan Borgia is walking around with the courtesan after they do the quick bargaining, the courtesan is taken to an isolated part of the party away from the other orgies that were going on. After losing his patience, Juan Borgia decides that he's done waiting on her and forces himself onto her, tearing into her clothes and choking her out. The novel goes a lot more into detail on this, but I'm sure you can put the pieces together of exactly what he did based on what I'm telling you right now. The girl already knew something like this was going to happen, but wanted to make sure Ezio can get Juan in an uncompromised position and therefore stopping any future harm to anyone else. After Ezio ensured that she was still breathing, he finally kills Juan Borgia. Very brutally, mind you, and lets him bleed out, in which Claudia shows up and takes the money and the girl back to safety. I actually enjoy these versions of events, even if it makes me a little bit uncomfortable to read it, because it does emphasize Juan's abuse of power and how he deludes himself to thinking that he's satisfying the people when he actually was causing more harm to them, overall enhancing the game's version of the point. As Ezio returns back to the Rose and Fiore, he finds the two courtesans distressed outside, explaining to him that they were followed back, clearly by the order of Juan Borgia himself. As Ezio panics, he runs in, seeing the guards are dead, and Claudia is wielding a knife. Claudia can actually defend herself, with Ezio having this newfound respect for Claudia. They finally speak to one another on equal terms, not Ezio trying to fulfill the big brother role, serving as payoff to the relationship plot thread from her introduction in this game, and another step in Claudia's personal character development. And with that, we end Sequence 5. As far as gameplay goes, I think Sequence 5 is one of the best structured sequences. as throughout the whole thing you can have a complete full assassin fantasy, figuring the identity of the banker, finding out his locations and assassinating him, and escaping even before you get to the set piece. The mission types are varied throughout and one seamlessly goes into the next, while the assassination mission itself gives the player plenty of options to tackle it. Even if there is an intended route to follow, once you learn how the cards and your target move and the layout of the level, it's pretty interesting in the different ways that you can tackle this. In my assassination mission on my last playthrough, I actually finished Juan Borgia in under a minute because I took a different route, and I find that pretty cool. Narratively speaking, I think this is up there as a high point. The arc is pretty straightforward, posing some good philosophies of the banker and Ezio criticizing him. It does do a really good job at being the first actual assassination in the game and sets a good standard of what the other arcs should strive for, while also continuing to develop the familial relationship of Ezio and Claudia when they first start off in the story, while they had the obligated loyalty that many families do have. Claudia had to show Ezio that she is more capable of being her own person, with Ezio having to grow out of being the protective older brother that he was also accustomed to being, and respect for Claudia for how far that she has come. Well, you can criticize the sequence's target for lack of screen time. I don't think that he was as much of the focus as the development was on Ezio and Claudia was. Ezio approaches Bartolomeo's barracks and inquires about the French general and their role within the Borgia. And as they're discussing, in a comedic scene that's actually pretty funny, unlike anything from the Quebec team, we're thrown into a battle with the French approaching the fortress in a mission that I find completely infuriating, trying to get 100% sync on, as you're not supposed to take any damage, but you're constantly bombarded with soldiers that the game doesn't always give you a chance to dodge or block their attacks. After the gates close, the general himself reveals himself among his soldiers, with Bartolomeo's wife, Fantasilea, being held hostage as a negotiation for his surrender. In a rage-filled moment, Bartolomeo leaves the barracks and approaches the French camp, with Ezio following behind, getting him to calm down and rethink his tactics. Bartolomeo realizes that with his wife gone, all morale has been drained, and contemplates surrendering in hopes that his wife is spared, which gives Ezio an idea. Kill some French soldiers, loot their armor, and disguise Bartolomeo's men. Infiltrate the fortress and overpower the French from the inside, using Bartolomeo's surrender as a Trojan horse. But first, Ezio must get the armor, so after sneaking through some French camps, Bartolomeo's men pick them up from behind him. So far in the novel, there aren't too many differences from this in the game. There's really only one noticeable thing that's worth mentioning, is that Ezio does get into one fight which results in the armors having noticeable scratch on it, but otherwise it's pretty inconsequential differences up to this point. Otherwise, as the troops gather, Ezio gets into another disguise. Ezio seems to have quite a liking for dressing in guards in uniform in this game. They march as we hear Bartolomeo talk about the French. It's important to note that based on what we know from the Baron up to this point, it's completely plausible that Bartolomeo has them figured out. Noting that the French alliance with Cesare is pointless, as Cesare intends to rule over all of it anyway, making an inference that the Baron and the French general are completely short-sighted and don't see the bigger picture, despite teaming up with Cesare, who sees the big picture himself. He also then quotes a line from Giovanni Auditore: "There will come a day in which men will no longer cheat each other, and on that day we will see what mankind is truly capable of." Which is an interesting line coming from Bartolomeo, from all people. A contrast from a man who lives for fighting, giving us a reminder that despite that, just like all of the other assassins that we see, he prioritizes peace above all else. As they approach the gates, the gatekeeper stops them after Ezio's convincing performance.
Mes soldats, conduisez le capitaine italien à son excellence, le baron. Il vous surround.
What part of France are you from?
Montreal!
Open the gate!
You speak French? There were a couple of French girls in Firenze.
they are allowed in, and we are again greeted by the Baron himself. Bartolomeo challenges his idea of honor by attacking his sense of nobility. Not in the sense that Bartolomeo comes from a poor background, but because he was born into a noble family. But because the Baron prefers to hide behind his men while Bartolomeo prefers to stand beside them. The Baron takes offense to this and draws a gun on Fantasilea, and Ezio finally decides to shoot the calling shot, catching the French encampment completely off guard. The Baron proceeds to take Fantasilea and use her as hostage to get to his quarters. Now being stuck in a corner, the Baron panics and Ezio closes in on him. Taking by surprise, the Baron finally reaches his end. During this Animus corridor, we get inside of the Baron's head a bit. Coming from nobility, he was convinced that being of high social status granted him inherent respect. The way he carried himself was completely a facade to hide his insecurities, as he was so used to people under him giving him this false idea of respect. But people, much like Bartolomeo, who were to call him out on this, he would internalize it and suppress them so he can keep lying to himself. But when he finally realizes this, it's too late. Ezio soothes his mind with one last message. May you be equal in death, as it doesn't matter what background you are, rich, poor, high or low class, everyone will end up the same, buried in the ground. As Ezio walks away, the couple are once again reunited, Bartolomeo once again shedding his hard exterior to show his vulnerability toward his wife, vowing to always stay by her side and never letting her get compromised again. And with that ends sequence 6. Overall, sequence 6 is definitely one of the weakest of the sequences. I don't think it's bad by any means. I just think in terms of the main narrative, it's kind of middle of the road with good moments dispersed in between. The Baron is kind of a nothing character. We don't really get that much insight on who he is, even in his own Animus corridor sequence. And then with some Bartolomeo's ranting toward him. I also come to find out that he's not even based on a historical character. He's a completely original character. So there isn't even anything to even look up to gain any insight toward him. Now you can argue that Juan Borgia was in a similar position. A rebuttal that the banker's missions were all interwoven with the Cesare plotline and had a much more noticeable impact on the narrative. Meanwhile, if you take out the French, yeah, the story changes, but not nearly as crucial as it is with sequence 5 or even the next sequence, sequence 7. Even for the B plot, as mentioned earlier, Bartolomeo's storyline is noticeably more isolated in comparison to the other two. Claudia's relationship with Ezio is constantly built on she shows up, and you can argue the same thing with La Volpe and Machiavelli and even Caterina. After this point, Bartolomeo doesn't really have much to do with the story, nor has much to do with anyone else in the story. Even regarding Ezio as a character, Ezio's relationship with Bartolomeo is exactly the same as it was in the beginning as it was at the end. So there really isn't even much of an emotional through line. So it ultimately comes out as filler just to pad out the time. You may even notice that I've barely even brought up the novelization, hoping for some expansion on it, but outside of some inconsequential changes, there isn't anything worth of note that would even serve this arc better. So what happened? I think that they noticed that Bartolomeo was active with the French around this time, and he was fighting with the Spanish against the French for the battle of Gariglia. I don't know how to pronounce that. So since he was active in the last game, he would serve as a good way to justify the mercenary factions being in this game. This would end up being the result. Sounds like an early form of historical tourism that I tend to criticize in the franchise a lot, and I don't think Brotherhood is immune to those criticisms. Luckily, it doesn't take over the whole game, and this sequence was quite short, so it's an easy one to get through. Even from a gameplay perspective, the missions themselves don't offer much replay value for me, as most of it you're relegated to set pieces, which aren't inherently bad, they just don't cater to the assassin fantasy outside of the ending when you have to kill the Baron himself.
But to be fair, even though I'm confident in my reading of the arc, both in the novel and the game, I want to be fair and say I could have missed something that was intentional, that just maybe wasn't clicking with me. Open to other interpretations of this that can overall enhance the arc, but as far as it goes right now, I think that this sequence is probably going to be the weakest in the whole story, unfortunately.
Back to the Sleeping Fox, as Ezio enters, he sees how lively the place is. People gambling, knife throwing, and I presume safely, and out comes La Volpe, and as usual, he's already knowing of Ezio's intention. Find Lucrezia's lover, Pietro, as he already has spies out looking for him. But La Volpe still hasn't let go of his suspicions of Machiavelli. as more suspicious activity is going on, and Machiavelli seems to be the name that is constantly brought up. When we first heard of La Volpe's suspicions on Machiavelli, that was back in the year of 1500. 3 years have passed, and despite Ezio's insistence on Machiavelli's innocence, La Volpe is still stuck on this. He really would not let this go. He is persistent. Speaking of persistence, it's found out that someone told the Borgia about La Volpe's spies, and it just so happens Machiavelli was asking about the search for Pietro. Ezio and La Volpe find the thieves, and after a series of interventions, each spy provides valuable information on Pietro as they uncover a plan for his assassination by the hands of Micheletto, Cesare's best assassin. Now, infuriated, La Volpe is insistent that Machiavelli is behind this. With all the available evidence, he is convinced that Machiavelli is behind it all and isn't willing to hear Ezio out anymore. And as much respect as La Volpe has for Ezio, there has been way too many close calls, and he doesn't want to risk his own men's lives while information is being leaked to the Borgia. So without access to La Volpe's thieves, Ezio resolves to use his own recruits to find a way to infiltrate the play. Ezio makes his way to Micheletto's location. As he arrives, he's surrounded by Cesare and a few nearby guards, and a familiar face blindfolded at the front. It was the senator, Edigio. Confirming that his suspicions that his letter was intercepted back in sequence 5, as he begs for his life, Cesare explains that he needs full control if he wants to reunite Italy. With Edigio's broken trust, he has to be executed. With Edigio dead, Cesare sets his sights on Pietro and commands Micheletto to hand out the costumes, inciting Lucrezia is only for him. In the novelization, it expands on this thought a bit. Prior to knowing about Pietro, Cesare, while ignorant of Lucrezia's affair, didn't really care for Lucrezia that much and only became inflamed when Lucrezia decided to send someone to tell Cesare himself, which lit this burning desire to have her all to himself that even he wasn't even aware that he had for her, further emphasizing his possessive nature of wanting complete control. Let's be real here, I know the Borgia siblings can be very short-sighted. Why did Lucrezia even bother telling Cesare? Even knowing that Cesare killed her own husband? Here are my thoughts. We know that their relationship can be very abusive, and Lucrezia even talks about this feeling neglected when Cesare leaves for long periods of times. While to any rational person, rational being pretty loose here, would try to make sure that Cesare doesn't know about it. It seems as though Lucrezia wants to manipulate Cesare and get some attention to herself. As much as Cesare is playing her, she is also playing him as well. It's reckless, and it shows that while she cares for Pietro, she probably cares for Cesare that much as well. So as far as Pietro's role to Lucrezia, while she may share some feelings toward him, he is ultimately a pawn in the Borgia siblings' game of chess. Oh yeah, and we have another tailing mission, in which again, I'm going to defend, in which this is probably the best one. Following Micheletto from a distance while we are also taking out specific targets to steal their clothes to infiltrate and catch your target off guard. Sounds like the mission from the last sequence that we just did, but actually relevant. After a lot of walking, Micheletto arrives at the Colosseum, being greeted by what I would presume are your own assassin's recruits that stole the costumes from Micheletto's men. As night falls, Ezio makes his way up the Colosseum walls in such a fantastic climb sequence that shows this sense of scale, similar to that of the Castello, as the camera zooms back a bit to show how small Ezio is in comparison to the wall that he's climbing, having to maneuver yourself around to not getting caught by guards, with handholds so far apart at times, making the walls a bit of a puzzle to work through, making the reward so worth it. And when you reach the top, you can get a good view on the entirety of Rome. Now, with the climb done, you have to take the gunmen out, and the game gives a bit of a parkour challenge as the camera pans around, showing the intended way through. But of course, you don't have to follow it, as there are plenty of pathways, giving the player plenty of freedom and expression to make their own way through. Even taking out the gunmen, you have so many options at your disposal to effectively take them out, either by straightforward or maneuvering around them. Their level design is so top notch, I didn't realize how well designed it was until I saw other people play through it and take different routes that I wouldn't have thought of. Soon after, Ezio makes his way for what are for sure are his recruits backstage as the play is started, and as it turns out, it's a reenactment of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. That is such an interesting choice of how to assassinate Pietro, and I'll go more into it in a bit. Ezio uses eagle vision that he's ensuring that he's staying on the correct path to not arouse suspicion. As Ezio approaches Micheletto, he uses his hidden blade to pierce his side, ensuring that the stab wouldn't be lethal as he lays him down and we get our next Animus corridor. And in a twist, since finding out about the spies, Micheletto made a contingent plan to poison Pietro with the vinegar which was already in the drink. With no more words, Ezio leaves Micheletto, knowing he's already bested him. Micheletto, not expecting this, questioned Ezio's decision. Ezio tells him,
I did not come here to kill you. He who is the cause of someone else becoming powerful is the agent of his own destruction.
And without any words, Ezio walks away. Now, if we take a look at the novelization version of these events, while the event plays out generally the same with the small changes here and there, much like the earlier scene with Cesare, there's an extra line thrown in which adds a little bit more context and foreshadows further events. If you live well, a dog always returns to its master and you will lead me to the real quarry. I wanted to highlight this because after this point, Micheletto disappears from the King's version of events, but in the novel's version of events, he continues to play a part, even if he's just in the background. As Ezio leaves him, while he may be injured for a period of time, he will end up taking a back seat as far as Ezio and the others are concerned. He is either dead or useless after Ezio leaves him wounded. I do like this idea of Ezio somewhat sparing Micheletto as it mirrors his decision to let Rodrigo go and the consequences that came after that. But instead of it being a mistake this time around, he actively uses Micheletto as his own chess piece in order to get closer to Cesare and to predict his next moves. Seeing as though there will be another search for Cesare later on, that line will take on such a whole new meaning, and I understand why the game doesn't have that line, but it makes me wonder if there was ever a plan to follow up on this in the game, but they were just restricted due to development time. As we know, this was made in less than a year. Now with Micheletto currently out of the picture, Ezio sets his sights back on Pietro and has him cut down from the cross as the guards set in. A band of mercenaries show up just in time to make room for Ezio, as so he can get to the doctor and have Pietro heal and take the keys from him. I think this is pretty cool symbolism, that by having Pietro poisoned and healed during a play where he was dressed as Jesus Christ, Pietro had his own resurrection. Sort of. While I still take the stance that Assassin's Creed does have its own commentary on religion, it understands how culturally powerful it is to use it as a narrative tool to enhance its story. With the keys secured, Ezio turns to see a familiar face. It's the same man who was at the villa attack, but what is he doing in Rome and why there? But as fast as Ezio is to notice him, he is just as quick to panic and run. After a chase sequence, Ezio finally catches up to him and finds a letter on him with the Borgia crest. It all makes sense now. The villagers getting chased from the underground, the constant leaking of information, and even the locations of the various spies. Machiavelli was innocent. Without hesitation, the thief thrusts his throat onto Ezio's blade and he lies dead. But with no time to process what happened, Ezio needs to find La Volpe before he gets to Machiavelli. This is a little bit in the novel and the game diverge a bit. While the story beats from here are generally the same, since the game is a literal race against the clock, the novel takes a different approach. As Ezio stops at the Rose and Fiore first and finds out some news about Madonna Solari's ties with the Vatican official. Then instead of going to Cesare in a hideout much like the game, Ezio makes his way over to the Sleeping Fox. Though admittedly the detour at the Rose and Fiore wasn't really necessary, and even in the novel it doesn't really add anything outside of just more world building, in which you can take that as you will, I do like the idea of La Volpe and Machiavelli would meet at the Sleeping Fox, as it makes it sound like La Volpe was going to set it up instead of La Volpe making his way to the Tiber Island unannounced. Both in the game and in the novel, Machiavelli is painfully unaware of La Volpe's suspicions, as La Volpe approaches and Ezio intervenes at the last moment, finally proving to La Volpe that Machiavelli isn't a traitor at all, but perhaps he should be a little bit more transparent on what's going on. But to be fair, La Volpe's suspicions weren't completely unfounded, even if they are a bit irrational. Just a nice little reminder that correlation does not always equal causation, and I really like how the narrative uses that to its advantage, while also instilling this idea of trust. So now, the assassins are united once more, and all of their main targets are off the board. But there's one last thing to do.
Volpe, how goes Roma?
Very well, Ezio. The French and papal forces are in disarray.
Then it is almost time. Call the assassins together. And bring Claudia.
Now?
Yes.
When it comes to Claudia's initiation, while it's cool to see her become an assassin, I think that the greater point is how it symbolizes her and Ezio's relationship. Throughout the entire narrative, while they worked together, their relationship was never one of equals, with Ezio taking on the bigger brother role, while Claudia not trying to be some damsel in distress and being one of his equals. And as the story progresses, Ezio finally puts behind the trauma of his father and brothers dying and lets Claudia rise on her own, thus seeing her as an equal. Claudia's initiation to the assassin serves as a fantastic metaphor for this, with Ezio as the assassin and Claudia always staying just outside of it. Despite working with the assassin, she was never fully seen as one, and when she proves herself capable, she is accepted, not just as an associate of the assassins, but as one of them. She has always had the heart of an assassin, she just had to be seen as one. It's such a beautiful use of thematic parallels to show both the growth of a supporting character, her relationship with the protagonist, and the protagonist's character growth as well.
You and I have not seen eye to eye on many issues.
After Claudia's initiation, Machiavelli acknowledges both his and Ezio's differences, noting in their past conversations and how they see what is best for the assassins, and finally conceding it to Ezio's methods and going so far as to offering Ezio to act as leader of the assassins in an official capacity. It's important to note that during the events of AC2, while not in an official capacity, Mario was essentially the leader of the assassins in Italy, with Monteriggioni working as the central hub for the other assassins. After the Valois attack, the assassins themselves were essentially broken, and during the events of Brotherhood was attempting to find some sort of structure to reform the assassins to better fight against the Borgia. Hence, without anyone actually agreeing to it, he was trying to fill in the position that Mario once fulfilled. Unlike Mario though, he didn't possess the same leadership qualities that he would require to. While Machiavelli is a good strategist, he is not a good leader, and the story goes out of its way multiple times to highlight this, whether it was due to his views on putting the people back in power, or his lack of good communication in relationship with the other subsects in Rome, and with his lack of transparency leading to the mistrust with La Volpe. Meanwhile, Ezio's actions throughout the narratives always serve to either show his leadership skills or to develop them further. Whether it was reforming the assassins to work together, recruiting those who need help, and in return they fight against the Borgia, not just commanding his people, but by guiding them, acknowledging where his shortcomings were, and actively making efforts to change them. The novel itself provides such a good quote that describes Ezio's perspective on how he leads, that perfectively encapsulate how well fit Ezio was being for the Assassin Brotherhood's leader. The Brotherhood itself was an association of free-minded, free-spirited souls, acting together not from coercion or obedience, but from a common concern and interest. He didn't own or have any right to control any of them. One of the things during the Crusades that the assassins, while yes, they were fighting for peace, they were often dogmatic in the way that they thought. When Altair reformed it later on, he didn't want them to follow in the same dogmatic ways that they were once doing, and opted for the assassins to completely work in the shadows away from any established organization. Ezio's reformation would be the next logical step to this, while he can be organized, but in a way that respects the individual's freedom, and not fall in the same pitfalls as the Levantine assassins did in the past, letting the people themselves choose to be there instead of being indoctrinated like those of the past, therefore being stronger in that. It's not a perfect system, but it's progress. On the rooftops, Claudia takes her first leap of faith. Behind her stands Ezio and Machiavelli, as Machiavelli reveals that he was the one mysteriously helping Ezio throughout the main story, thus solidifying the respect that he had for Ezio, even if Ezio just didn't know it. Something to note, as the novel is pretty similar in the game's version of it, there are some added pieces that describe Ezio's emotions as Machiavelli offered the position of mentor to him. Ezio was never expecting to be appointed leader of the assassins. He was actually filled with mixed emotions. Though he's been an assassin for so long that a lot of this is just second nature to him, the other part of him just wanted to reject it and go back to his normal life, feeling a small sense of just resentment toward being an assassin that already consumed most of his life at this point. But he knew that becoming a leader wouldn't give him the privilege that he wanted. Instead, he put aside his doubts and stepped up to the plate anyways, as he knew he had a mission to complete. As the spy enters, he informs him that Cesare is back in Rome again. Machiavelli holds out his arm, as Ezio's advisor tells him to finish him what he started, and Ezio takes a leap of faith into Act 3. Sequence 7 was probably the best sequence in the game, with gameplay not really being anything too much of note, the Colosseum sequence being the highlight of this sequence, also having the best tailing mission as you're constantly having to kill Micheletto's guards to steal their outfits. Narratively speaking, sure, it didn't have a cool assassination set piece like sequence 5 did, but I think its emotional payoff to almost everything that was building up to this point. Just as I described earlier, with the exception of Bartolomeo's arc, every other plot thread that is seemingly separate all gets intertwined at this point and all serve as character development for Ezio himself. As the next sequence loads in, we pick up immediately where sequence 7 left off, as Ezio breaks into the Castello once again. Just instead of climbing its outer walls, he uses the key from Pietro to slip right in, and overhears a conversation that the Pope and Cesare are having a meeting in the apartments above. So this gives Ezio the perfect opportunity to get some information and eavesdrop. So once again, Ezio is scaling the walls to find the Pope's apartment, and much like when he eavesdropped on Cesare and Lucrezia, he finds a window at Rodrigo and Cesare and silently watches. This scene with Cesare and Rodrigo is such an interesting scene to watch, as all the work Ezio and the assassins have done are starting to affect Cesare, as he doesn't have any money to fund his army, and his French allies are essentially gone. Rodrigo remains completely unsurprised as he keeps his composure, as he reveals that he is even more aware of what was going on than ever, as he knows about Cesare's plan, understanding that the assassins fighting back was inevitable. I also love that during all of this, that you can see Cesare struggling to retain his composure, as his voice will range from being aggressive to his normal voice throughout this whole exchange. Lucrezia bursts through the door and tells Cesare about Rodrigo's plan to kill him, showing that just like in Assassin's Creed 2, Rodrigo is always trying to be one step ahead. Which leads us to the most iconic Cesare scene of all time.
I control all of this. If I want to live, I live. If I want to take, I take. If I want you to die, you die!
I think this is quite a great thematic end for Rodrigo Borgia. He spent the better part of 20 years searching for this apple, making his way through the papacy, just utterly convinced that he was the chosen one, only for the apple to be his demise. Does it show some parallels to the biblical story? Maybe. Maybe intentional, maybe not, I'm not sure, but I like it.
At this point, Cesare has snapped. Seeing no other choice than the piece of Eden to help him accomplish his plans, he threatens Lucrezia as she attempts to appeal to his love, but Cesare wants no part of it, and demands the artifact while physically abusing her, and when she caves in, she is broken on the floor and he leaves to retrieve the apple. The book's version of the scene is largely the same, but with some notable differences. After Rodrigo dies, Lucrezia tells Cesare that he should see a doctor, but Cesare refuses as he knows Rodrigo would try something like this and took some prophylactic in preparation for the meeting, so even when the poison takes effect, it will not take him out. In comparison, the game does not say this, so it could be interpreted that he didn't ingest enough for it to kill him. Also, when attacking Lucrezia, this is also played out differently than in the game. While in the game, Ezio has to find an open window on the other side of the building to enter, not hearing when Lucrezia tells him where the apple is, and also implying, based on Lucrezia's screams, that Cesare is still hurting her. The novel has Ezio begrudgingly having to hold himself back so he can hear where the apple is, so he's waiting for his opportunity to enter. Cesare is not only hitting her, he throws her to the ground and is kicking her, illustrating his lack of care toward even his own family. Once she tells him and he leaves, Ezio pries open the window and makes his way in. While I get that it's more engaging on a gameplay level to have Ezio find his way in, narratively I think it just makes more sense for him to get through the current window that he's directly right in front of. Both ways aren't bad though, and they work for their respective medium. I could be looking too much into this, but I think the game has Lucrezia's neck bruised up when Ezio comes in. I don't know for sure though, but it kind of looks like it. Fun fact, apparently there was a deleted scene where Ezio was supposed to have an animus corridor with Rodrigo, where Rodrigo admits that Ezio sparing him did some good and he was trying to stop Cesare, but Cesare saw Rodrigo as weak and unfit and disregarded anything he had to say. Cesare calling him out for being unable to beat the assassins and gave up to purely just being a figurehead of the Templars, while Cesare in contract had ambition to become more, even more than the Templars. While the Templars still sought peace, Cesare still sought power. If you're interested in the actual dialogue, you can find Slider V2's data mine in the scene. There's no animation or voices. It looks like it's just a unearthed script, so I recommend you to check out his video on it for the full thing. Once Lucrezia regains any of her senses, she weakly tells Ezio that the apple is hidden away at San Pietro and the race for the apple is on. Honestly, I think this scene perfectly encapsulates why Cesare is the perfect foil for Ezio. Their personalities and methods completely clash with one another. Even if you don't find them within philosophical debates against one another, it's very clear in their actions throughout the story.
While they both come from noble beginnings, the way they view the world is entirely different. While Cesare says he wants unity within Italy, it's become clear that's the lie he tells himself to justify all the harm he's doing to it. Not only the harm, but to cover up his own possessive nature. But then on the opposite side of the coin, there's Ezio. While he also wants unity within the people, he doesn't demand it like Cesare does. He wants the people to choose it for themselves. While he is a leader, he is part of the people. Not someone who should be feared, but someone who should be respected. Cesare inflates himself thinking that he's higher than what he is. Ezio is bigger than what he is. Ezio doesn't think himself that high, but that's what he is. Not just within this fight within the not just with this fight with the Borgia, but the legacy he would later leave across time.
Now it's a race against the clock, and Ezio must get to the apple before Cesare does. And as he runs through the Castello, he runs right into Cesare, which is quite funny when you think about it. This is the first time Cesare has probably even seen Ezio in person, and I don't think he saw him at Monteriggioni based on the distance, while Ezio has been watching him for literal years. It's kind of funny when you think about it. But I could be wrong, because the novelization has Ezio and Cesare actually meet when Cesare first shows up. But after a quick escape, Ezio makes his way to San Pietro Basilica, where he finds the Apple of Eden within a pine cone shaped structure. I seriously tried looking up what this thing was called, and I could not find anything on it. I even had to resort to asking Google Gemini, and it told me it wasn't a real structure. As Ezio steps off the structure, Cesare arrives with his papal guards and stands ready to fight. But just as soon as he pulls out his sword, the poison from the apple kicks in, rendering Cesare unable to fight. The papal guards stand forward, Ezio raises the Apple of Eden, and waves of light strike the guards, forcing them to kill each other. As fear overcomes Cesare in his weakened state, he falls back and calls more guards, and Ezio is surrounded and must escape. I'd like to note something: the mission gives you the optional objective for not losing any health, but when you use the apple, you lose health, therefore forcing the player into pure escape if they want to 100% the mission. For years, I've always wondered why they would give you this Apple of Eden, the use of it, but then tells you not to use it. But after reading the novelization of it, while it doesn't really answer the question explicitly, it does shed a bit of light on it. So the novel's version of these events, while the scene plays out almost exactly the same, the difference is when Cesare's poison starts taking effect and he calls the guards, at least 10 more guards come out armed with both swords and muskets. But in this version, Ezio doesn't use the apple to defend himself, he quickly finds cover and dismantles them using his various tools. It's a pretty cool scene actually, so when Cesare sees Ezio's skills, that's when he pulls back, because he knows he can't keep up in this condition. So that's when Ezio decides to make his escape to the hideout and meet with the other assassins. Once at the hideout, he updates them and lets them know of the current updates. They make a plan to get back to Cesare, in which Ezio plans on using the Apple of Eden to get to him.
So from this point on within Sequence 8, it's so fast-paced, at a breakneck speed, it's going to be a little bit hard for me to switch between the novel and the game. So from this point on, until I say stop, at least for sequence 8, we're just going to streamline it and combine them both. Like we said, we're just going to assume it's all canon at this point unless the novel directly contradicts the game's version of events. So I will take priority within the game's version, but use the novel as a way to fill it up.
As they continue their conversation, Ezio sends them to do various tasks. Claudia must go back to the Rose and Fiore and collect any information they can on Cesare's plans and assemble the assassin recruits. La Volpe must send out his spies and keep an eye out for any Templar chapters that are attempting reorganization. Bartolomeo must assemble his men and be ready for any call. And Machiavelli uses connections at the Vatican to try to make sure that the next pope elected isn't under any Borgia influence, and Ezio uses the apple to gain an idea on Cesare's current location. As Ezio heads out, he walks in on Cesare's conversation with his guards, revealing that with the French allies gone and with their own spies cut off, the current Borgia regime cannot weed out the assassins as efficiently as they were able to before, and requests Cesare's help. But with Cesare ill and without an army, he's completely dependent on Micheletto to follow through. As they realize Ezio is there, Cesare falls back and calls the nearby guards, with Ezio making quick work of them using the Apple of Eden. Unlike his last use of it, he uses it as a weapon, ensuring he doesn't look into the apple himself, but Cesare has ran away at this point. After weeks of a deadlock, a new pope is elected. Claudia informs Ezio that Cesare is having a meeting with the Templar loyalists in the countryside of Rome, but without knowing the meeting place. Ezio follows the Templar Cardinal to the meeting spot, as they inform Cesare that Della Rovere has been elected as Pope. Cesare is disappointed by this decision, as the new Pope isn't going to be his puppet much like Rodrigo was. But with the political climate changing, Borgia money isn't as valuable as it used to be. As Ezio steps out of the shadows once again, he is immediately attacked. Though Ezio came prepared with some recruits and attacked the guards, during this chaos, Cesare flees once again. But this time, Ezio himself suffers from a flesh wound, and there's a casualty of one of his recruits. As weeks pass, during this time, Cesare has not returned to Rome, but news spreads that Cesare finally has rallied some men at the main gate of Rome. Ezio arranges to gather the assassins and meet there. When they arrive, the men were small, not as much as Ezio thought. He suspected they were not fighting because of loyalty, but for money instead. Money that Cesare doesn't have. As they break out, the Pope's new army arrives, bearing the new seal of Julius II. And in front is Orsina, Bartolomeo's cousin, arresting Cesare and under the orders of the new Pope. But as Cesare is taken away, he shouts,
No! 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 This is not how it ends! Change will not hold me! I will not die by the hand of man!
As peace has seemingly arrived, Da Vinci and Ezio meet once more, but Ezio is not sure what to think at this point. Sure, Cesare has been arrested, but as long as he has some type of influence, it's not a guarantee that he'll stay away. So he begrudgingly uses the apple once more and leaves to find Cesare. Though there's a slight difference in how the game and the novel play these scenes out, where the game implies that the apple shows Ezio exactly where Cesare is breaking out, while the novel just shows the prison Cesare is staying at, in which essentially starts another story arc of trying to find Cesare. That was a lot to summarize, but that was due to both the game and the novel being at breakneck speed with a lot of time gaps at this part. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I really don't have too much to say on this. A lot of this acted as a bridge into the final sequence. If the novel itself strays off more or drew things out, I would have noted it, but a lot of it was pretty close to the game with some added dialogue here and there, such as meeting after the apple is retrieved or the ending with Leonardo. There's also an added scene where Ezio talks to the new pope, where he agrees to keep the assassins a secret. But it really doesn't play into the main plot that much, so I didn't feel the need to include it. Otherwise, gameplay wise, the sequence was pretty middle of the road. I really enjoyed the stealth sequence at the beginning, as yeah, you're breaking into the Castello once again, but you're taking a different route, which also is really well designed in its own right. But I think at this point, when you get the apple, it's cool the first time around, as it serves as a cool power trip, being able to finally use the object that you've been chasing for pretty much like 3 games now. But after that, it kind of loses its charm. Narrative wise, I very much enjoyed the beginning of the sequence. Seeing the Borgia family's fallout, as it's directly informed by Ezio and the assassins' actions, is very satisfying to see. Rodrigo dying by an apple is thematically satisfying, and finally getting back to the Apple of Eden after all this time is such a good thematic reward for Ezio building himself up for the past 3 years. The rest of it, as I really can't say as much to it, it comes at such a breakneck fast speed that I can understand why they sped through it. You're mainly seeing how much the world is changing from the Borgia influence and seeing Rome get returned back to where it should be. I just think that maybe there should have been a little bit more meat on the bones. I'm not sure what it would look like. It just feels like it's missing something. I just don't know what that is. I lack the words to be able to say what that is. But hey, the final battle is almost here. But before that, as I said earlier, the book essentially has its own arc that is put between Ezio's search for Cesare. So before we get to the climax, let's explore this.
Now, it might seem odd that I'm putting this within its own part instead of interweaving it, much like I did with Sequence 8 and all of those parts. But the difference is that Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, as many of you know, takes place mostly within the year 1503. But between 1503 of Sequence 8 and 1509, there's a 4-year time gap, and this is what fills that in. I'm not sure what I'm going to be using as visuals just yet to fill it in yet, because I'm not just going to be on camera the whole time. I don't think that's going to be visually pleasing for any of you, so I'll figure it out at some point, because again, I'm just recording this, and I usually just wing all my editing when I get to that point, so I'll figure it out at some point.
Now, if you're not really interested in like the book only part and you just want to skip right back to the game, you can go back to this time on screen, because this part actually is going to take a while, but I do think it's important to the plot, so that's why I wanted to include this. If you're really interested in this, stay here for this, because this is going to be long and I guarantee you're going to be interested. During the initial scene of Ezio scanning for the apple in the future, it doesn't show him Sequence 9, but it shows him escaping the Castello on a slave ship, that same type he encountered when trying to save Madonna Solari back in Sequence 3, thus bringing back a seemingly throwaway plot point that rears itself back in. Ezio follows behind, but as the ship is already leaving with Cesare stowed away, he gets the help of Claudio, the young thief who got hurt against the guards back in Sequence 3. Although in the game, he doesn't really show up for the rest of the narrative. In the novel's version, after that, he realized that thief life wasn't really built for him, so he took up ship work instead. So remembering Ezio saved his life 4 years ago, he returns the favor and helps Ezio give chase to the slave ship. After an altercation, the slave ship is stopped and Cesare is once again arrested and taken back to the Castello. Yeah, this part's a bit of filler, as it ultimately loops Cesare and Ezio back to where we last saw them. But it does build off plot threads that were introduced back in Sequence 3. But I'm not gonna lie to you, as much filler as this somehow feels less intrusive than the Baron arc with Bartolomeo. As I've said before, that arc feels almost completely isolated from the rest of the sequences. And while I do like Bartolomeo as a character, the story itself feels almost out of place with the thin plot threads holding it together to the rest of the story. At least here, it deals directly with Cesare and pulls on 2 separate memory missions to give some type of conclusion to them to justify itself. About a year later, in 1504, Ezio and the Pope were having a meeting. The Pope received a letter confirming that Cesare's deportation from Rome was a success and was transferred to a new fortress. Ezio attempts to inquire about this new location, but the Pope denies this, as he would know of Ezio's intentions, but attempts to ensure Ezio that Cesare shouldn't be a problem anymore, and that he's going to be stuck in the fortress in the middle of Spain. But with Cesare's words, "No chains can hold me, no man can murder me," haunting his mind, he has doubt. As the conversation goes on, the Pope tells Ezio that he's aware of Borgia loyalists, and that's why he brought in Ezio as the counselor. But even being aware of them, with Cesare completely cut off from the communication, he really doesn't see the Borgia as a problem anymore and would much rather focus on the remnants. Of course, he tells Ezio that he's aware of the Assassin Brotherhood, but since they're allied, he'll keep the secret safe. Sometime later, Ezio is attempting to use the Apple of Eden to figure out Micheletto's location, but can't seem to figure out like he once did before. But he thinks to himself that he shouldn't really use the apple. As tempting as power as it is, he shouldn't rely on it. But if Micheletto is still out there, he must still be loyal to Cesare, and Ezio can use that to find Cesare himself. So Ezio makes up his mind and calls a meeting with the assassins, with all except Machiavelli being surprised at Ezio's plan. not seeing the point since Cesare has been locked up. But after some convincing, they concede and Ezio gives out the plan. Bartolomeo goes to Forli and deals with any Borgia loyalist out there, while Caterina's army is still weak. Again, Bartolomeo just kind of doing his own thing. La Volpe is to send spies to find any outer cities of Rome and report any loyalist out there. And Claudia uses her girls to gather any information coming across the Rosa and Fiore. And it's with this conversation that Ezio acknowledges that he doesn't really go out there as often and ask how their mother is. This is where we find out that Maria's old age is catching up to her, as more and more she speaks about Giovanni and the boys, in which Ezio says that he'll visit soon. Machiavelli asks Ezio to use the apple, but Ezio denies him, explaining his reasons why. So with the search for Cesare starts, and the first step is to ask around. So Ezio tracks down one of Rodrigo's mistresses. After a conversation with her, she tells him that she doesn't know where Cesare is, and Ezio and Machiavelli take their leave. Machiavelli is insistent on using the apple, but Ezio refuses. As they travel, Ezio notices that they are being followed by a mysterious blonde woman with a slitted dress. As they attempt to shake her, they notice that she's well trained, so they take advantage of this verticality of the rooftops and quickly lose her. Though she can run, she just couldn't climb. After a bit of rest, they head toward their next lead, another one of Rodrigo's mistresses. This one gained noble status after Rodrigo's rise of power in the papacy. I'm not really going to bother with names too much unless they're relevant, because a lot of these characters don't show up again nor have any huge purpose outside of the investigations, so I really don't see a point in name dropping them. So with no luck on this one either, Machiavelli patience grows tired, but Ezio insists on one more and he'll at least entertain the idea of using the apple, justifying it by not having to rely on it but their own skill. Though I find these conversations between Machiavelli and Ezio interesting, just because I normally agree with Ezio on this and the story typically depicts Ezio as being in the right, but I do find myself agreeing with Machiavelli more here given how urgent the situation is. Someone can make the argument that Ezio is acting out of character here by not treating this with as much urgency as Machiavelli does. I would just respond by saying, if you compare it to the games version where you're stuck with the Apple of Eden, sure. Yeah, Cesare was an immediate concern during this period of time, so they needed to act fast. But at this point, they really want to make sure that Cesare dies. It has been over a year since his arrest and there hasn't been anything of concern. From an audience point of view, I get it, because it goes at such a breakneck speed, but in a real-time event, a lot of time has passed between Cesare's arrest and this specific moment. So their next stop, Cesare's mistress and the mother of his only legitimate child. With no luck on her either, it did confirm one of Ezio's suspicions, that the Borgia family were hated even by those close to them, so they didn't really get any positive information on Cesare's whereabouts. He can at least confirm that it's not very likely in the event that he escapes that he would be able to take captive with them. While I quickly brushed over the summaries of the conversations themselves, I do find them interesting as they do provide greater context of the Borgia family, and even Cesare's mistress even acknowledges the STDs that Cesare had, and she holds ill will toward him as she worries for her own daughter contracting the same disease from her father. It would have been interesting to see how you'd play all of this out in a video game setting. If these were just theoretically make it in, as it's really only Assassin's Creed 1 that has straight up investigations, while Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood were either relegated to side missions or interwoven within set pieces. As Ezio and Machiavelli finish their conversation, one of Machiavelli's spies, Bruno, approaches them with new information, revealing that the woman who was following them was not attempting to hurt them, but was a Templar spy herself. Her job was not to intimidate Ezio and Machiavelli, but she was ensuring that they were out of the way so Templar loyalists could kidnap Claudia Auditore while she was attempting to infiltrate St. Peter's. They've taken her as prisoner at a hideout east of the Vatican. So without hesitation, Ezio and Machiavelli make haste.
I actually do have some words to say about the Claudia Auditore kidnapping plot. Mostly negative, some mixed opinions, a little positive. But for now, let's just move forward.
As they arrive, Ezio bangs on the door. The door opens to the courtyard. When they step in, they're greeted by a disembodied voice who reveals to them that not only was the woman following them was involved, but Machiavelli's spy, Bruno, was actually working for them as well, as his message was purposely to bait them there. Also telling us that Claudia was also looking to find the Cardinal so she could have another contact for the assassins. The Cardinal was killed by a carriage and Claudia was taken, but she's alive. They approach the entrance to the next building. The next door opens, and as they travel through, they see Claudia.
Now, I'm going to quote the book here because I think it's probably a little bit more impactful if I actually say it. Claudia was seated half undressed and bound, her hands in her lap, her face and her breast bruised, a gag in her mouth.
And even when she's at the mercy of her captor, she still manages to convey to Ezio that she did not give up by showing him her branded finger. These Templars, knowing about Ezio's past with his father and brothers, took Claudia, knowing that Ezio would do anything to make sure that she's safe. But in exchange for her life, Ezio would have to leave Rome. Just as Ezio refuses, the figures come out of the shadows, unsheathing their swords, and the man who was next to Claudia holds a knife up to her throat. In quick thinking, Ezio gives Machiavelli some poison darts, and Ezio quickly gets the man off Claudia before he can hurt her any further. In a fit of rage, Ezio acts out of character similar to when he killed Vieri, and instead of giving the man a quick death, he purposely doesn't give him a killing blow immediately by lashing at his groin, then takes the man's knife and slices his throat. During his dying breath, as blood starts to fall down, he confirms that Micheletto is alive and drops dead. So with the other loyalists gone, or dropped dead, Ezio and Machiavelli unbound Claudia. Though she has been beaten badly, they didn't do more than that. So Ezio takes her into her arms. Now, I'm of two minds when it comes to this Claudia side plot.
Much like I said earlier, I actually do enjoy the Ezio and Machiavelli investigation part of this. As the main game, since Machiavelli had his own side plot with La Volpe, it was necessary for the game's main plot for Machiavelli to have very reserved, conservative screen time. But this actually allows Machiavelli to have more of an active role within the story because that plot thread's already done. And so I think this also enhances Machiavelli's character because since the game's plot needed him to have less of a role, this also elevates him to have a greater role. Though on Claudia, in contrast, well, I get the idea of it and I really respect what the concept of it was. I don't think the execution of it was well done. It's just because we spent the main game building Claudia up to not needing Ezio, only for her to need Ezio. Now, we haven't had any time with Claudia as a full assassin to really establish a lot of these things. And so, like, I get the idea of it. It almost completely undermines the original plot. While it's not contradictory to think that an inexperienced assassin would actually experience these things, I just think the problem is that this doesn't serve any extra purpose to it. If she was an assassin, this same thing could happen if she was at the Rosa in Fiore, just being there and not as an assassin. So for me, it doesn't hit that same emotional payoff that it was looking for.
Not asking her to be an Ezio where she's a complete badass. Not at all. But if I am interpreting her character arc correctly, she's supposed to go from a protected younger sister to an equal comrade of Ezio who doesn't always need him to be there. It would just be nice to have at least a moment where we really solidify that equal standing before her inexperience does show. Just as it stands now, she comes off more as a burden rather than a help. Sometime later, La Volpe meets with Ezio and informs him that Micheletto has been found at an encampment in Zagarolo. After summoning assassins, with the exception of Claudia and Bartolomeo, they ride towards Zagarolo to find him. Once they arrive, they surround the encampment, and after a fight, Micheletto is taken prisoner by the assassins. And in a thematic mirror to Cesare, Micheletto utters a similar statement. "Chains will not hold me, any more than they will hold my master." So they take him to the Signoria in Florence, the same place where Ezio's father was when they were arrested, to which the governor, his advisor, and Machiavelli all attempt to interrogate him with no success. But at the very least, with Cesare gone and Micheletto also in chains, the immediate threat is gone again. Back in Rome, while Ezio is still bothered by Cesare, we also find out that Ezio has been sending out letters to Caterina, who was recently forced to step down as a leader of Forli due to the people's backlash against her. After this point, Ezio wouldn't receive any letters back from her anymore, so he finally had to admit to himself that she used him, and that night in the villa meant very little to her as it did to him. This is a very fitting end to the Ezio-Caterina romance, As I said before, I don't necessarily prefer Ezio dwelling on his feelings toward Caterina. I don't think it's bad when you separate it. It just shows that Ezio is human like the rest of us, and while Christina's death did affect him a lot and shut him out, his one-way relationship with Caterina gives him feelings that he hasn't felt in years, but gives Ezio this odd validation that he shouldn't have moved on from Christina. During a conversation with Da Vinci, he suggests that Ezio take Claudia out of Rome and back to the Monteriggioni. But Claudia doesn't really want to go back to Monteriggioni, as she's grown a love for Rome and sees it as her new home. And honestly, I like that little detail. It really does say a lot about her character state at this point. Where in Monteriggioni, it was never really her choice to do any of that. She was just, in a weird way, kind of forced to stay as a book person. So despite having essentially 20 years of history there, she never really considered it to be her home. It was just essentially a place to live. This is also confirmed in Claudia's database entry, where there's a letter entry from her dated in July of 1495, while she was still at the villa. To hear of Ezio's adventures only reminds me of my lack thereof. This is not the life I've dreamed of as a child. Ezio does not understand. He treats me so delicately, I despair of ever emerging from this prison. Whereas in Rome, she has only spent approximately about 5 years in there, and she has way more opportunities to grow and be herself than she ever had while living in Monteriggioni. This is such a good mirror to her character arc, where Claudia, after a point, served more as a background character in the events of AC2, but really grew into a supporting role during the events of Brotherhood. While we find out that due to her injury, she's given up control of the Rosa and Fiore, the brothel was then controlled by the Pope and his network of spies. Kind of odd for a Pope to do it, but I get it. But I have some sad news for you all. But Maria Auditore has died. As we knew earlier, she was sick and wasn't really getting better. But when Claudia was kidnapped and Ezio had to go save her, the novel doesn't detail exactly when she died, but it seems to be implied that this happened during Claudia's kidnapping. Kind of sad to think about. Imagine from Maria's perspective for a second. Being traumatized by your husband and 2 sons dying, being silent for literal years just due to the shock of it, then finally being able to have a few years of helping Claudia with the brothel only to fall ill, and your only daughter and the last son are nowhere to be found. That's such a tragic way to go out. It's kind of insane to think about if you've never read the novel version of the story. You'd have no idea that Maria Auditore died during the events of Brotherhood. And I've read the Revelation novelization as well, and even in that one, Maria's death isn't acknowledged at all in it. So I've gone 15 years without ever knowing about this, and I know I'm not the only one. So, exploring Brotherhood's novelization, my initial reaction was that I was a bit disappointed that this was omitted from the main game. But after letting it process for some time, while I largely agree with this sentiment with myself, I can see why it was cut, given as it doesn't play too much into the main plot. Though, I still ultimately think it should have been in there, given that she's a legacy character from Assassin's Creed 2, and would help Brotherhood's story have a bit more personal connection to it. I just wish the database entries in the game pointed this out at the very least. Something I love that the games ended up doing was updating the database with more information as the story progresses to avoid spoilers. And I can't remember if that starts in Revelations or in Assassin's Creed 3, but Brotherhood doesn't really do that. So the information is only up to the point where we met them within the story. Giving general background information, I had to kind of double check Maria's entry to see if there was some mention of it just to make sure, and there just isn't anything there. Afterward, the Pope calls for another meeting with Ezio, revealing to him he knows that Ezio has the Apple of Eden and inquires on its use. Once Ezio tells him this, the Pope makes an interesting comment about the apple being useful to him, but it can also be used against him. But after some convincing, he then lets it go and advises Ezio to just put it somewhere safe so it's out of the hands of any bad actors, while throwing a little nod to the modern day plot of saying, if you wish, leave some kind of clue for a worthy successor, possibly a descendant of yours, or who perhaps alone will understand it. A little nod to the modern day plot, which is, we don't really get too much of that in the novel version, so I appreciate that. There's also this one scene where Ezio gets in contact with Cesare's doctor, who tells him about his disease and speculates that he thinks Cesare was deported back to Spain. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, as it doesn't really tell us anything that we didn't already know before, so I don't really see a point This is just one of those black and white filler points. It doesn't contribute much, if anything. So we found out about this disease from Cesare's mistress, and we already knew from the Pope that he was deported back to Spain, so it doesn't really accomplish much. And I'm not going to defend it like I did with the other ones. There's really nothing redeeming about this. It just pads out the time. Sometime later, Ezio is awoken at 4 a.m. by Machiavelli informing him of Micheletto's escape. As the day before his execution, he was smuggled a file by a loyalist, and that was used to file off a bar, allowing him just enough room to escape. By the time anyone noticed, he was already escaped the city. So Machiavelli made for Rome, as that is the next place with loyalists about. Something interesting that I noticed, that it's a subtle change. During this point in the story, they are being referred to as Borgia diehards, compared to Templar loyalists like they were being referred to when the Borgia were in power. Really highlighting that the Templar faction is separating themselves from the Borgia faction, in which this is completely making sense in how Rodrigo is describing his disdain for Cesare's lust for power, with Rodrigo himself being a proud Templar who still wanted peace but only wanted to focus his efforts on the politics of power, whereas Cesare would take the power by force. In which this marks an interesting question. Where are the current Templars? As it seems for now, outside the Borgia Templars, there are either Borgia loyalists or they've been driven out of Rome and forced to work behind the scenes once again. Or there are other possible explanations that they've been driven out of Rome entirely either based on the assassins or the papacy through Pope Julius, as he is aware of the two factions and their eternal war. I tend to lean on it's a combination of both of them. With Ezio's initial efforts through the game's narrative that led to Cesare's arrest, then with Julius in charge, he used his power to then, through various networks, drive the remaining Templars out. Whether this was by force or not, I'm not sure, but this seems to be the best explanation given the available evidence within the story. Given light of the recent events, Machiavelli urges Ezio to finally use the apple to locate Micheletto. With no other choice, Ezio finally gives in and grabs the apple. The apple doesn't tell them much, just gives them an image of a tower in Spain as is confirmed by King Ferdinand's flag. But they don't know where exactly it is. So with what little information they do have, they think Micheletto is going to find Cesare in Spain. So they prepare to leave, and while Claudia is still recovering, she is sent to Florence under the care of Paola while Ezio's away. But first they stop by Da Vinci's place to ask about the apple. As they speculate on the apple, Da Vinci tells about his time studying the apple under the Borgia watch, and he couldn't really get it to work. He knows that Ezio did, and with it not working as intended now, he initially makes a joke that it has a mind of its own. Then suddenly, an unfamiliar voice, while the book doesn't really detail who this is, we know from the game that this would later end up being Juno, who tells Ezio to head for Napoli, as Micheletto is headed for Valencia, but to hide the apple in a vault for future Brotherhood members, in which we know will be our current modern day team. So Ezio proceeds to take the apple back to the Colosseum vault and places the apple there, in which, fun fact, this scene is actually in the game, but it's purposely out of place. So it happens after sequence 9. Instead, I'm 90% sure it's because the modern day team is only trying to find the apple and don't care too much about Cesare's defeat themselves.
I very much actually enjoy this part. It's really nice actually acknowledging the modern day, something that modern Ubisoft doesn't seem to like to do, but it also doesn't distract itself from the current plot that's going on. Whereas in comparison with the beginning with Minerva, where Minerva completely avoids saying anything about the modern day, and it becomes a kind of clunky to even read that. Even if you don't want to include the modern day within the novels, I still think it should still be there, because if they are meant to be promotional materials for the game, so ideally you would want it to have people direct people to the actual games versions, so they can, if they are interested within the modern day plot, they can experience the modern day plot.
Some time passes, midsummer 1505, Ezio's 46th birthday. Ezio, Machiavelli, and Leonardo arrive in Ostia. After an hour of searching, Ezio is sure that he's already out of there and headed for Valencia, but he needs to be sure. As they're discussing, a nearby blonde woman overhears their conversation and reveals that Micheletto was just there recently. When pressed for information on where he went, she demands coin in exchange for money. Though, with some hesitation, she reveals that Micheletto went to the brothel, and the next day chartered a boat for Valencia, thus verifying what Juno said, and they need to catch up quickly. So they board another ship headed for Valencia and go that way. What a way to spend a birthday! As they arrive, they notice a group of men watching them, so they are sure to stay alert. Micheletto must have known that they would come, so he had his men stand guard. Once they reach an alleyway, they are then ambushed by even more men. After a brief fight resulting in some fleeing and others dying, there's one last one who was captured and interrogated by Ezio. He gives in rather fast and reveals that Micheletto is headed toward the Castello della Motta, as that is where Cesare is being held. After attempting to stab Ezio, Ezio finishes him off. They return to their captain and ask him for directions to the Castello della Motta. He gives them a general direction, but helps them prepare for the journey, giving them a list of contacts in nearby cities so they know that they're going the right way. So after 2 days of preparation, they head out. This part's actually a lot longer, so it was a bit harder for me to summarize all of this up. It's fine. It does have some pacing issues where people who are rather unimportant are having conversations that don't really add anything, so it does feel like more padding. I don't really think the Ostia triple is necessary at all. If you cut that out and went straight for Valencia, pretty much nothing would change, and I don't even think the characters' interactions make it worth it. The next part is pretty interesting because the perspective temporarily shifts from Ezio's point of view to Micheletto's. As we've become accustomed to being stuck with Ezio, and anything that happens within the story, either from him or happens off screen, and he hears about it through other people. It's an interesting choice taking advantage of the medium, as the game is inherently restricted to Ezio's perspective due to the framing being genetic memories. But the book doesn't really have that problem, so it can explore points where our protagonist isn't present. So Micheletto and his 10 men pull up to a castle where Cesare is located. They can barely see him by his red scarf, a contingency plan made by Cesare before he was arrested. Using his connections and the gear, they have given a higher guarded disguise for Cesare so he could sneak most of his way out, where he'll have a 130-foot rope waiting for him. Once he's escaped, after the initial relief of being free from prison, a burning desire for vengeance against the assassins, and when he's ready, he wants to strike back and ensure that they are wiped out for good. After traveling for some time, he finds Micheletto and his men, and they ride off into the night, knowing that the assassins are headed their way. The perspective cuts back to Ezio as he, Machiavelli, and Leonardo arrive at a castle, but Cesare and Micheletto are long gone. As Ezio doesn't want to lose any more time, Leonardo falls ill, so they are forced to stay and rest for another week for him to recover. This part's actually pretty enjoyable as it doesn't overstay its welcome. After all this buildup of Cesare's inevitable escape and Ezio's search for him for about 2 years, it's good to see from the audience perspective that we actually get to see the narrative pay this off while keeping our protagonist just 2 steps behind, showing that the apple wasn't a universal get out of jail free card. During the week, Cesare managed to build up a small fleet, as in Valencia Borgia money actually held some value. So even if he didn't have his army back, he only needed just enough to conquer Napoli, then his army could grow from there. To slow Cesare down, Ezio asks Leonardo to make some bombs that he can take out the fleets, and after giving Leonardo the materials he needs, he spends 2 days making 20 bombs for both Ezio and Machiavelli. After helping him out one last time, Leonardo decides to head back for Rome, as he doesn't have much left to offer them. Leonardo doesn't have much prevalence in the story anymore, so I want to take a moment to talk about his character in regards to his role in this part of the story. Compared to the games version, where Leonardo is mainly just part of the economy system in the game, narratively speaking, he doesn't really offer much, which isn't bad. We know more than enough from Assassin's Creed 2, and given his forced work under the Borgia regime, it's completely serviceable for the video game. For the novelization, Leonardo does serve a way bigger role throughout the story, even if he's working in the background. Things such as Leonardo mentioning that he purposely slowed down the Borgia while working under them, and giving Ezio his codex gear are all interweaved into the main plot, thus giving his limited screen time more justification and relevance. And honestly, it works. I don't necessarily think he was integral to the main plot, but I do think highlighting his role with the fight with the Borgia only serves to enhance what was already there. Even with this extra material, he isn't under Borgia control anymore. He could have easily stepped out for the rest of the story, but they take full advantage of that and give him more agency and an active role within the narrative. After Leonardo leaves, Ezio and Machiavelli take the ships and slowly throw their bombs and take out 12 ships, causing chaos within the town. Taking advantage of the chaos, they hide within a crowd to make their way to an inn, where they find Micheletto and Cesare having a meeting and choose to eavesdrop on them. Cesare, already hearing of the chaos at the docks, loses his temper at Micheletto, telling him how much he's failed him and wants nothing to do with him. Though Micheletto tries to plead with Cesare, Cesare refuses to work with him any longer and shows his true loyalty toward him. In a blink, Micheletto snaps and tries to grab Cesare's throat with the signature technique, but Cesare had already anticipated this and shoots him point blank in the face. Ezio and Machiavelli split off, Ezio placing himself in a position to capture Cesare and Machiavelli attempting to flank him, but accidentally alerts Cesare to his presence and takes a shot at the shoulder, causing Cesare to flee the area. Ezio is then forced to abandon Cesare and attend to Machiavelli and brings him to a doctor. So with Machiavelli out of the fight, he is forced to say goodbye to Ezio and plans to meet him back in Rome. Ezio rides forward. He discovers that Cesare has a Navarrese army and plans to take Viana for Spanish control, and with this new information, Ezio rides forward. And with that, the last and final fight with Cesare begins.
Though, like I mentioned earlier, despite pretty much half of this essentially just being filler that you could just cut out and nothing too much of value was lost, I'm not gonna lie to you, I still like it better than everything from the Baron de Valois sequence. I think it does serve to tie up a little bit of loose ends from sequence 8, just because it concludes the Micheletto and Cesare relationship and Ezio's animus corridor with him, while also serving as a great transition that would get us to the final battle in sequence 9. I just really appreciate for some type of conclusion over the Ezio and Caterina relationship, because although I don't even think it was needed to even do it, because the main game doesn't even focus on it that much, I really do appreciate it as a little more of an epilogue to send it off. Because even though I prefer the game not focusing on it entirely, if you're going to include it, I think that was probably the best way to do it. I kind of wish we had some DLC of this. Maybe take away the filler parts of it, the stuff that doesn't really matter that much, but definitely keep the parts where it's searching for Micheletto and Cesare and that part forward.
The Sea of Red that is the Animus Corridor has returned, seeing flashes of Minerva and the various events of Ezio's life, as the Animus struggles yet again to load you into the new memory. But this time, unlike the first time, this memory was able to be accessed. Once the memory loads in, we again see the same scene as Ezio chasing after Cesare through a battlefield. But this time, instead of the memory glitching and skipping, it plays as normal. With the swipe of a hidden blade, barely missing Cesare, Cesare calls some nearby men to him. And Cesare disappearing into the fog of battle, some nearby soldiers come in close on Ezio. With Ezio slowly getting exhausted from the long journey of fighting Cesare, he is forced to defend himself from nearby soldiers, with the stray cannon narrowly missing Ezio and hitting the group instead. Ezio faints and wakes up sometime later. March 1507, Viana.
We're pretty well aware that sequence 9 is a pretty short sequence and a pretty action-heavy sequence. Even the novel's version, it only spans about 15 pages. As usual, I'll point out the more notable version of these events, but generally sequence 9 plays out generally the same.
Speaking of the novel, there's a slight line change with Cesare and Ezio's initial confrontation, where Ezio cites his thirst of revenge for Mario, which is pretty inconsequential, much like the other changes that seem rather pointless. Then there's a quick scuffle with the soldiers. Instead of the random cannon interrupting the fight in the game, Ezio just falls from exhaustion, and the soldiers with more important things to do just leave him to die. Both versions are still a little bit contrived to let Cesare gain some distance from Ezio, though, not gonna lie, while I acknowledge it, it doesn't really bother me that much. Once Ezio awakes, he grabs a nearby horse and chases for Cesare, but as he rides the trail, there are muskets firing at him. Yes, I know it looks like cannons in the game, but I think it's just supposed to be a more hyperbolic for drama, with one of them eventually catching Ezio's horse. Ezio escapes from the gunfire and comes upon the outskirts of the town. Ezio was sure to stay out of sight as he made his way throughout. He sees a group of guards and Cesare, as a mother cries out for her son only to be met with a knife as she is murdered in cold blood. But this wasn't the time for him to strike. Still shadowing Cesare, he can still see the brutality that he and his soldiers were bringing upon the town, revealing that just like Monteregione, this was not a normal invasion. This was yet another genocide. Spanish soldiers being brutally slaughtered, the women being taken advantage of, local preachers were crying out to their gods. the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. It was pretty disheartening. Seeing the state of the town, Ezio knew that Cesare army has already won, but he knew he couldn't leave without Cesare taking his final breath. One part that I really enjoy about the gameplay of this is that although the mission itself is pretty linear, the level design itself is pretty open and lets you approach it however you want to. Whether you want to travel on the ground and continue hiding that way, or take to the rooftops and avoid the guards on the roof. For years, I would just take the ground approach since it was pretty straightforward. Then whenever I was inevitably caught, just because I'm pretty horrible at stealth and I'm gonna lie to you, just take everyone out by fighting. I didn't even think about taking another way until I saw someone else do the level and they did an entirely different route, which really made me aware of this game's design philosophy. Which I like about this game in general. Where there's obvious intended paths that they want you to take, there are plenty of times that they leave open to the player to explore for themselves. You don't really have an incentive to do so, but it's more so for the love of the game and letting players express themselves however they feel fit. Ezio approaches Siege Towers knowing Cesare has got to be in the midst of battle up there. As he climbs up, we get this really cool set piece of Ezio climbing the tower as the tower is set on fire. The novel adds this quick detail that this is local soldiers pouring Greek fire onto the towers as a way to defend themselves against the incoming invasion. Ezio just so happens to come at the worst timing when it was already set on fire. Though it doesn't really have much narrative relevance, I think it's just a cool moment for gameplay. Having a player climb the tower at a fixed camera angle, having to climb there all the way up with a rising fire acts as a countdown timer as it gets closer to you. He is forced to take a leap of faith to escape the burning tower and turns to finding another one to climb up that as well. As Ezio reaches the top of the battlements, he sees Cesare cutting down the soldiers with ease. Even with 4 years of being out of battle, his skills have not shown any signs of degradation. But as Ezio approaches Cesare with nowhere else to run, Cesare's only choice is to fight Ezio head on. Gameplay wise, much like most boss fights within this franchise, it's not really a high skill ceiling, and it's mostly story driven. While the gameplay itself isn't that special, I do think it's pretty interesting. As you go through the phases of the fight, you are slowly taking off Cesare's armor. Probably just a symbolism of tearing Cesare down. But I think the dialogue is the more interesting part here. As the fight goes on, you hear Cesare and Ezio talk. Something interesting I've noticed is that while the game purely has Cesare focus on his skills as a fighter and the way he sees himself, the book takes a better version of this fight, outside of it having scripted choreography, right? While they fight, Cesare talks more about his worldview. Cesare shows that he sees both Rodrigo and Ezio as basically two sides of the same coin. Older generations that actively hold the world back, not realizing his active hypocrisy that his regime has already been doing. When Ezio tells him this, Cesare, much like his father, sees himself as the enlightened one. Similar to how Rodrigo saw himself as the chosen one back in the last game. Seeing himself as doing no wrong and everything he does is for the best of the people, that he just doesn't know it. Thus drawing a thematic parallel between the both of them. The novel's version of this is a lot better, as yeah, Cesare has already shown a lot of what his motivations were within the main story, which is fine, but his dialogue near the end can become a bit of one note when he's still only going on about his ego. The novel's version just adds an extra layer and really explores why Cesare does what he does, attempting to explore this nuance of him essentially having a god complex, but also justifying it with a somewhat good argument with seeing the older generations as constantly holding people back, in which I can actually relate to it some way even if I don't agree with Cesare's conclusion. As the fighting continues on, both men are starting to get tired. Ezio manages to end the fight and we have our last Animus Corridor.
The throne was mine!
Wanting something does not make it your right.
What do you know?
That a true leader empowers the people he rules.
I will lead mankind into a new world.
Che nessuno ricordi il tuo nome. Requiescat in pace.
You cannot kill me! No man can murder me!
Then I leave you in the hands of fate.
Pure cinema. It's kind of hard to talk about this part without saying what other people already said, but I'll try something. But after literal years of tracking down Cesare, slowly bringing down his influence, while simultaneously Ezio gaining influence, but not by force like Cesare does, but through a natural love and for the people and having their well-being in mind. As I talked about this more in depth earlier, Cesare and Ezio are pretty much the perfect rivalry for each other, both becoming leaders of their factions by having two completely different philosophies and how they do it, and with their worldviews directly clashing toward one another. I just can't see a more fitting end to Cesare's character. If you look at it metaphorically, Cesare falling down can be compared to his reign. Being at the top, having almost everything handed to him, to have it all be taken away and hit rock bottom. With the Animus loading once again, the Apple of Eden comes into frame, and this transitions us to the earlier time in 1504 when Ezio went to search for Cesare while in prison. It's a bit confusing when these scenes are taken out of their proper order, but this is used as a transition to get us back into the modern day. If they put this earlier, the modern day cast would have literally no reason to finish off Ezio's story. There isn't an official in-universe explanation for this, but I do have a hypothesis based on the data that we do have. We know that there was a 4-year time skip. During this time when Ezio's concerns about Cesare being alive this whole time, I think that's the point where his emotional state during this time gets transposed onto Desmond through the Animus. Thus, when we come back to sequence 9, even though the memory is stable enough to see it, the memories before that are still unstable. So Desmond achieved an even better synchronization with Ezio after defeating Cesare, allows him to rewind a little bit and finally figure out which memory that apple is in and access it. At least just enough to get the proper information so they know where to go and how to access the temple. Now, take it with a grain of salt. Based on the data, this is probably the best explanation I can come up with. And with that, we are officially done with the novelization part of the story. There is an epilogue on Ezio's 48th birthday as Machiavelli, Leonardo, and Ezio all say their last goodbyes from one another. Leonardo, as much as he respects the assassins, declines to be one and chooses to move to France so he can spend the last years of his life in peace. Machiavelli chooses to go back to Florence and continue his work over there, while Ezio will stay in Rome to continue leading the Italian assassins.
Let's put ourselves in 2010, because at this point there weren't current plans to continue Ezio's story. And so I think this epilogue does do a really nice job at giving us a little bit of a send-off of these characters that we grew to love both in Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood. Even though that we're done with the Animus part of the story, we still have the modern day to get to. So while I can talk about the Animus plotline, I want to get through the modern day before and talk about it all as one story instead of separating them two from each other. I mean, you can, but that's not going to be the approach I'm going for.
Desmond is suddenly pulled out of the Animus. Although they know where it is, they never manage to get to the password. But Desmond recalls the symbol on the wall matching the one in the vault. Sean deciphers it to mean God. At this point, Sean is talking about the Tetrates, in which the Tetragrammaton, granted, I don't speak Hebrew or understand the language, so my knowledge of this is going to be very limited. From what I understand, if you take the Hebrew consonants Yod, He, Wah, He, which can be transliterated as YHWH, Yahweh, or sometimes JHVH, Jehovah, with each number in Hebrew having a numerical value with, again, Yod is 10, He is 5, Wah is 6. So if you arrange these letters in a specific triangular formation, although I cannot read Hebrew and not understand, so I can't fully explain how this arrangement is significant, each of his numerical values would supposedly equal up to 72. So when Sean is talking about the Bible verses, Exodus 14:19-21, I initially thought these verses were going to list the 72 names of God themselves, but when looking them up, it's just the story of Moses parting the Red Sea, which left me confused at first. After a bit more digging, I realized that this concept only works in ancient Hebrew, much like the Tetragrammaton, where each of these 3 verses contains 72 letters each. Now this is where it gets a bit too complex for me, But apparently, if you rearrange these letters as 72 triples of letters, if you reverse the orders of the letters in the middle, set those to 72 triplets, become the 72 names of God. So I can only give you like a surface level understanding of how this is supposed to work. And yes, I did fact check the construction of the Colosseum, and that was indeed built in 72. I've seen some sites say between year 70 and 72, but the general consensus I've been seeing is 72. I tried to find out if there's a direct link between the two, whether the construction was intentional, but as far as I can find, there isn't any, at least not in any real life context. So if I had to speculate on why this was chosen from a narrative perspective, since Assassin's Creed is pretty on the nose with its use of Christian symbolism, I think that since we're in Rome, this is a perfect point to blend primarily the Christian point in the timeline and blend it with the Roman gods of the past, that would be the Isu in this case, and use a Roman structure, the Colosseum. Therefore, take the 72 names of God and the Juno, and the link that puts them together is the Colosseum, and that would give us our password, 72. Arriving at the Colosseum, with the Colosseum itself being filled with construction gear, the only one who can take the main entrance is Desmond. So with the others split off to find an alternate pathway, which smoothly transition us into our next parkour section. Gameplay wise, this section is fun. There isn't anything more that I can say that isn't repeating the same things I said in the first modern day section. All of that relatively holds the same here. Narratively though, much like Monteriggioni, I love the narrative parallels it plays. This is pretty much throughout the story, where you're exploring these places you've been as Ezio and coming back with Desmond later on. And while they're the same generally, and surprisingly enough, I think Brotherhood's Modern Day is the only game in the series to ever explore this concept. AC1 and AC2 both had the characters in newer structures in completely modern areas. Whether it was Abstergo Labs or the Hideout, Revelations, Desmond's inside the Animus 100% of the time until the end, and when he wakes up even in AC3, although Desmond is going to be in different parts of the world, he's in like New York, a place where Connor would have been. Colonial New York is pretty much nothing like modern day New York, so there isn't much connection with the past. That really helps this game stand out with this modern day story having limited screen time. It's visual storytelling at its peak. Speaking of visual storytelling, as Desmond travels throughout the Colosseum, he gets to the lower levels and sees more ghosts on horses, which isn't actually acknowledged, but it's not random. During one of the followers of Romulus mission, Ezio finds himself chasing a man dressed in Jubilee costume and arrives at an entrance of Juno's temple. This would be used as foreshadowing and another link to the modern day portion of the game. Man, I love even a mission that seems so isolated is introduced in a series of side missions. It's interwoven within the main plot, and it's so subtle as an Easter egg that you can just forget. But forgetting isn't really bad in this case. But after some cryptic words by an apparition of Juno, Desmond finds themselves in Santa Maria Arcole, a church that was built on top of the Temple of Juno. This would fuel my earlier thoughts of the entrance to the temple being 72, as having a Christian church being built on top of the Temple of Juno just blends the old Roman mythology and the Christian religion together. This is subtle characterization of Juno, slowly revealing her stance on humans. As we know, humans were originally created by the Isu for purposes of enslavement. So if you're questioning that, you can also check out my video that goes a lot more in depth on this topic. But essentially, Minerva would have more optimistic and empathetic view of humans. Juno is slowly revealing her prejudice against them, like almost any other Isu would. If you're on a first playthrough and without the knowledge of the later games in mind, these are just vague enough to not be able to understand her intentions. As Juno is helping them, she is oddly condescending toward them. But since she is linked to Ezio, and it's completely understandable from both the characters and the audience perspective to think her and Minerva would be working with one another, since information at that point was so scarce. But alas, after flipping a switch, a podium comes out of the floor that will lead directly underground, straight to the Temple of Juno. I generally love the implication that whenever these places in Italy were built with the intention of going to the temples at some point, while in other games, the Isu temples are more isolated places. I love the aesthetics of the temple. It fully embraces the sci-fi nature of the series that makes the modern day look ancient in comparison, creating a distinctive feel as if we're in some type of like alien spaceship or something. Even the Temple of Juno itself has a primarily blue color palette to it compared to Minerva's golden color, giving the two completely different vibes.
This is amazing. Wow.
So we're finally here, spending all this time looking for the Apple of Eden that is just out of grasp. But first we have to do another parkour puzzle. Again, same opinion on this with the rest of the level, so I'm just going to brush past the gameplay part of this to not repeat myself too much. As Desmond goes through activating the switches, more Juno apparitions are speaking, and yet in a condescending way toward humans. She speaks about the six senses being knowledge. From what I can tell, this is referring to Desmond's eagle vision sense as she talks about the blue shimmer, and they try to pass it on to humans after the great catastrophe. So this would just tell us that eagle vision is a version of this sixth sense, but a much diluted version of it due to the amount of Isu DNA that would progress. With the puzzle done, the stairs of the apple form allow the group to finally get to the apple so they can figure out where those other temples are. And as they approach, the apple's glow starts to intensify, showing the same symbols Desmond saw at Abstergo, the same symbols Subject 16 wrote in blood. But in a flash, as soon as Desmond touches the apple, everything freezes. It's almost as if time itself has stopped, and Juno speaks again.
You have activated it.
Let me go!
On the 72nd day before the moment of awakening, you, birthed from our loins and the loins of our enemies, the end and the beginning, whom we abhor and honor, the final journey commences. There is one who would accompany you through the gate. She lies not within our sight. The cross darkens the horizon.
Now this is so cryptic, and I have to break this down a bit. On the 72nd day before the moment of awakening, the scene takes place on October 10th, 72 days before December 12th, 2012, and she was referring to herself and her eventual escape from what we would learn to be the Grey. You birthed from our loins in the loins of our enemies, the end and the beginning, who we abhor and honor. She is specifically referring to the crossbreeding between Isu and humans. Since their sixth sense allows them to essentially calculate the probable timelines, she is seeing both the two outcomes that would be the solar flare, therefore one being bad and the other being good. The rest of it is pretty self-explanatory, and I'm assuming if you've gotten this far, you know exactly why Juno said this.
Stop, please!
You know very little. We must guide you. Cease your struggle.
No!
It is done. The way lies all before you. Only she remains to be found. Awaken the sixth. Go, alone!
What a cliffhanger ending. Yeah, sure, the explanation later given during Revelations having Lucy as not a double agent but a triple agent, as she's actually a Templar. This can work in concept, but there should have been subtle hints in Brotherhood, which they didn't do it, so it was clear that this decision was entirely made at the last minute. But taking it on its own and not looking at it retroactively, I do really enjoy this ending. It serves as such a shock and a really good tragic payoff to the character development that we got during the beginning of the game, and while also doing a good job at continuing and interweaving the Animus plotline with the modern day one with the use of thematic parallels and mirrors, thus giving both plot lines importance. And I'm not sure if it was intentional or not, but the relationship between Desmond and Lucy acts as a thematic parallel with Ezio and Caterina's relationship. As we know, Ezio had feelings for her, but Caterina used him for her own purposes. I don't think Lucy was taking this evil stance and purposely manipulated Desmond in the same way Caterina did. but I think she was more beholden to her ideals as a Templar than her emotional feelings toward Desmond, and the same thing with the rest of the team. Therefore, much like Ezio and Caterina, it was never going to work. Like I said before, I like this idea in concept. I just don't think sticking that explanation in a DLC for the next game was the right way to go. It would have been better if we got some hints that were scattered throughout these games, or at the very least Desmond stumbles upon this information himself. At least for Brotherhood's case, the sudden shock of it works in his favor for this ending. Otherwise, I don't think it would have nearly the same impact as it would as if we had confirmation of Lucy's alliances beforehand. And with that, Desmond goes in the shock, Lucy falls dead, and the credits roll, and that concludes Assassin's Creed Brotherhood.
Now, I started this back in May of 2025, not too long after I dropped the Assassin's Creed Shadows review. Now, if you've watched that, you generally know my opinions on the narrative of Shadows. And so, after kind of being soured by that, I wanted to actually go back to a game that I actually love and continue to love and really explore that, and wanted to make sure that what I thought of it wasn't just going to be boiled down to, this reminds me of when I was a kid. Now, over the course of these past few years, after coming back to this franchise, I really wanted to understand what I like and dislike in these games. I really wanted to be able to properly articulate why I like something. Yes, as much as I've criticized some of its narrative, both the novelization and the mainline game itself, such as the novel avoiding the modern day story, or Sequence 6 in its entirety, or the novel's filler content, while yeah, it can be a little bit fun to read, is ultimately filler. It's used to pad out the story. All that aside, after exploring the story and attempting to read into what the writers were originally intending for it, that it gave me a greater appreciation and understanding for the story. Even when having to go off short development time and having to abandon the original trilogy plan that was for it, they still somehow made this feel like a properly intertwined story with both the Animus and the modern day storylines, feeling like a next step for the series. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is a game that means a lot to me, both in its narrative and its gameplay. Sure, it has its problems, but when it does something well, I think it's worth going through the lows to get to the highest of highs. It serves as a fantastic next step to Ezio, fixing some problems that AC2 might have had, I'm not going to go into that here, and fixes them within Brotherhood. And even if Brotherhood might have some problems, it is also further enhanced by its next entry, Revelations. So after replaying the game again, and reading the novelization version multiple times, and writing all of my thoughts down on this, recording all this, it really did give me a greater love and appreciation than I had at 13 years old when this game originally released. And I really hope that this essay served to convince all of you of that.